Thank you all for joining us. We want to grant permission to the Westwood Media Center to live stream and record the meeting. Is there anyone else who wishes to record the meeting this evening? Okay, great. We want to welcome everybody who's here. We have our agenda before us. So Emily is here, Maya is here for the school. I think we're going to start off with the school. So thank you. Anybody else? Lemma's here. So thank you all for joining us. That's great. As always, for remote participation, we ask for folks to keep your microphones on mute. If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. You can do it either by waving in front of the screen or using the little raise your hand icon. And if I don't see you, Jane will, and she keeps me very much on track with that. So I appreciate that, Jane. So please, everybody do that. And then I think we are going to do the roll call. Is that right, Jane?
Yes, we can do roll call.
Okay.
Bill Bruce.
Here.
Jim Ferraro.
Here.
Lauren.
Here.
Mike Gay.
Here.
George Hertz.
Here.
Angela.
Here.
Peter.
Here. Here, did you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, Peter, I heard you. Thank you. Tom Kilgariff.
Here.
George Laham.
Here.
Diane.
Here.
Chris Pareda.
Here.
And Alex.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. I think with that, we move to the Pledge of Allegiance. We can all unmute for that.
Okay.
Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic
for which
it
it
stands,
one nation, under God,
God,
indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Play ball.
All right, play ball indeed. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is the update on the select board meetings. There were two. And I'm happy to see that the chair of the select board is not here, because otherwise I was going to have to ask his forgiveness when I butcher the things that they considered. But I'm not going to give you details. I'm just going to give you high-level overviews because I will butcher it. And
Mike is here. He's in attendance right now.
Oh, hi there. Okay, you can yell at me.
Let me move Mike in.
So the select board, there were two select board meetings, one on January 24th, the first one. And there was some great and interesting discussion. The Council on Aging received a $500,000 unrestricted grant, which they were very appreciative of. Then there was a long discussion about the Hail Task Force and the land that is privately owned there. And there's a task force that's been working on this issue for quite a long time. I'm looking at my notes here to see if I can find the date, and I can't. But they have been talking with the select board, and the select board has been working on this. There will be considerable public discussion, and it will eventually come to FinCom, but I will make the statement that it is not before FinCom tonight. It is being discussed by the select board. There was a member question about the Hail task force, but we're not going to take that up because that's not before us. That's really before the select board. Then there was a long discussion about the traffic study on Pond and Clapboard Tree and concerns by resident about the speeds. And so they've done some speed analysis there, and they're talking about putting in stop signs where the yield signs are and making the speeds a little bit more consistent along those two streets. Then there was a discussion about some grants. And I think that is what was significant about that meeting. Then The second meeting was on February 7th. And we are going to hear about one of the subjects that they considered was the draft MBTA compliance guidance on the multifamily zoning districts. And we are going to hear about that. We are going to hear about that from the planning board when the planning board does their final presentation. So that will come before us this year. They then discuss the budget update, which we are, of course, going to hear about. They discuss the annual town meeting articles, which I believe we are going to talk about assigning by the end of our evening. And then they again talked about the Pond Street and Clapboard Street traffic study. So that is getting a lot of attention from our select board, and they are still working on that. And I think you'll probably see some results of that discussion coming out. So that's what I've got. Mike, hopefully not too terrible summary.
That was great, Diane. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Chris Coleman, Diane, two things.
Chris Coleman has his hand up.
Yes, he would like to speak, and also Renee is joined us.
Hi, Chris.
How are you? Thank you very much. And just, I thought I heard, Madam Chair, you said the grant was for 500,000. It's for 50,000.
50,000, thank
50,000. Just
you.
clarification. Thank you.
Yep, you're right. Misread my notes. Thank you. Any other clarifications on my missed comments? See, Mike, you can't give me any credit because.
Well, I think Chris was hoping that that was really the right number. He was
Yeah.
looking for free cash earlier.
All righty, thank you, Chris. Any other hands up? No. Okay.
Renee has joined us.
Oh, so we want to really welcome you. Where are you? Raise your hands. Oh, hi there. Does everybody see Renee Gauthier? Renee is our new member. Welcome. We are so happy to have you. So you are actually in education, and I have just a little bit of a summary about you. And let me see if I can find it so I can tell folks. And of course, you can do this much better than I can, but you work for the Boston Public Schools, Boston Latin School as the Learning Center Director. You've served as the head baseball coach, where they earned 11 straight seasons qualifying for the Mass Division I state tournament. Is that all true?
It's all true. You have my coaching resume there that I had sent along to you guys. But yes, I'm a teacher. I've been a special ed teacher for 25 years and a head baseball coach for a long time as well. And I'm excited to join and listen and sort of follow along tonight and learn from everyone, as I'm just getting started here.
Well, Renee has had 100 career varsity wins as head coach at Boston Latin School. Come on, you're showing us all here.
It's all true. It's definitely true. And coaching is a passion of mine. Right now, I'm coaching Westwood Little League. I love coaching. I love teaching. I'm a career educator, and hopeful that I can help you guys out in any way that I can.
Yeah, I'm more impressed by your special ed teaching.
Yeah, I've been teaching kids with all over the spectrum, kids with anxiety and depression, autism. But that is 25 years when you don't say it very often, but when you say it out loud to a group of people that don't know you, it is something. It's being at Latin school is a real special it's a special experience every single day. So I've been there almost 20 years now, and it's a wonderful place to work.
Well, I will give you the heads up that there is already a request that you join the education subcommittee. And you're at the right meeting because you're going to hear the education report tonight. And so we are.
I believe it's called the draft, isn't it, Diane?
I think it was called the draft. Yes,
Yeah.
I don't think you can. I don't think you can say no, to be honest with you. You have George to answer to if you do. And did we give you a mentor? Jane, does Renee have a mentor?
You and I had talked about it, but we haven't finalized it yet. So we'll do that maybe tomorrow.
Okay. Anybody want to volunteer to be Renee's mentor? Please let Jane know. I'm sure we're going to hear from several of you. And so Renee, that person will sort of help you to, kind of understand what we do and you know, how it works. And then I think we probably will draft you into that education subcommittee. So
And I want to go on record, Diane, as opposing any attempt that Renee draft Emily to fill the newly open spot at the Boston Public Schools.
Yeah, we are all on record supporting that.
Yeah, I second that, Chris. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but I appreciate the sentiment.
All right. Well, Emily, we are going to turn it over to you to do the Westwood Public Schools fiscal year 23 budget presentation. So thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you tonight. I'm joined tonight by Maya Plotkin, who's the chair of the Westwood School Committee, and also by Lemma Jean-Baptiste, who is the director of business and finance for the district. I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, very good. And let me actually get the slides going. Okay. So my plan for tonight is first just to spend a few minutes talking about FY22, because I think that context really does inform some of our thinking about FY23. And then I'm going to talk about the FY23 operating budget proposal, including looking ahead a little bit to what we think might be on the horizon for then future budget cycles. And then I'll turn it over to Lemma, who will talk about the capital budget. So what has happened in FY22? I want to start just by talking about special education, because this factored a lot into our thinking as we thought about FY23. So, you know, as this committee knows, special education is one of the areas in a district's budget that is sometimes less predictable than other parts of the budget. The good news is that halfway through the year, our tuition expenses are actually within budget right now. A big difference for us, however, is that this past summer, at the start of the fiscal year, we did significantly expand our special education ESY programming. ESY stands for Extended School Year. And so this is a program where we provide instruction for students who qualify for an extended school year through their IEP. And we had a lot of students who participated in that program. We really wanted to try to do our best to immediately start addressing some of the impacts of the disrupted year last year with the pandemic, and make sure that students were well positioned to begin this fall. You know, as a result, our ESY program this year far exceeded what we had budgeted for it. The good news, though, is that in the fall, we became aware of an opportunity through the state to apply for some grant funding to support our special education efforts. We applied for that, and we found out about a month and a half ago that we received the full amount. The maximum you could apply for was $200,000, and we went for it and were awarded that grant. And so that will certainly go a long ways towards offsetting those ESY expenses. Another challenge has been really what's happening in the job market, which I think is challenging in many sectors right now, and education is one of them. We have had to go to contractors to fill some of our vacancies in student services in support positions. You know, I attribute that largely to this post-COVID job market disruption. Those are really important positions. We need them to support students, but as a result, we're running a little over 100,000 more than we would have anticipated. The good news, though, on the plus side, is that we have received a flexible use American Rescue Plan special education grant. This is really one-time money. It's intended to help us stabilize after the pandemic. It's $215,000. And so luckily we have that revenue to support us through this year. I say all of that to say that at this point, we think that we will be able to close out FY22 without having to tap into our special education reserve account. And that's very significant because it really means that we were able in FY23 to budget quite tightly for special education knowing that we still have a reasonable balance in our special education reserve. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. We have had some continuing COVID costs. So we had many tent rentals that we dealt with in the fall, PPE purchases, and of course we have continued to employ nurses as part of our WPS COVID team. They've been really essential for us this year. And so that has run about $160,000. And some good news, oops, my slides aren't moving, there we go. We have gone after some grant funding. And so we were very excited that we have been able to realize a significant increase in our METCO grant funding, about $250,000. This increase in our METCO grant is to support our expansion into the elementary levels. So Westwood has been a participating community in METCO since the late 1960s, since I think 2 years after the program was founded. Our commitment is longstanding. We are one of only 3 METCO districts that doesn't begin the program in kindergarten. We currently bring students in 6th grade. We've wanted to expand for a long time. And due to some increases from the state legislature to the METCO program, we have this opportunity right now to do this expansion. And what's exciting is that in committing to the expansion, we were awarded this $250,000 this year to support our planning for next year. But what I want to emphasize is that this increase is an ongoing annual increase to our METCO grant. And so it does, in fact, fully support the costs of expanding the program into the elementary level. In addition, we got a smaller grant of $67,000. It's one-time money. It's a grant program from the Massachusetts Department of Education to support the goals of teacher diversification. This is a big initiative in the state of Massachusetts. The educator workforce frankly just doesn't match the demographics of students in Massachusetts. And there is a real desire to increase the diversity of educators for our kids. And so this is certainly something that's in alignment with our goals as a district. And this is money to support some of those efforts. It is one-time funding. Some other important context for FY22. We are seeing some recovery. So our school lunch participation is strong. It is above pre-pandemic levels. In fact, our bus and athletic fee revenue is back to pre-pandemic levels, and our extended day and Prodigy program, that's our private music lesson program, is back to pre-pandemic levels. And so those are all things that are supported through revolving funds. And so it's very important that the revenue come in, because that is in fact what supports the costs associated with those programs. So as I turn to FY23, there were really sort of 4 major factors that we considered in our budget priorities. So of course, we always look at our contractual salary obligations and other fixed costs. As you know, school districts are really people-driven organizations, right? The vast majority of our budget goes to paying salaries. And so we take a look at that. And I think significantly, we will be engaged in collective bargaining with 3 of our units this spring, including the Westwood Teachers Association, which is our biggest bargaining unit. And so that is a significant unknown as we plan for FY23. We're having to make some assumptions there. Next, we always look at enrollment trends. And sometimes the last couple of years when I've been in front of this group, we've talked a lot about how the enrollment in the district is kind of shifting from level to level. We've had sort of like bubbles of enrollment going through different grades in the district. But this is really not a significant driver in the FY23 budget. So, you know, there are changes in enrollment. Where they are isn't really a significant driver. And I'll say more about that in a bit. I would say we're really focusing a lot on current student needs. Our focus is on stabilization and long-term recovery from the pandemic for kids academically and also emotionally. And, you know, we've really thought about this priority. It's in terms of what teachers are observing, what administrators are observing, feedback we've gotten from parents, from students. And so this is where we continue to focus. And frankly, I think what we're realizing is that that will be a longer term prospect than maybe we had ever imagined. And then finally, of course, we have an articulated district strategy for improvement, and we have priority areas and goals. And so as we're developing the budget, we constantly refer to those priorities and make sure that where we're spending our resources is aligned with that work that we're trying to do. And so as we maybe start to emerge from the pandemic, you know, we're really trying to look with renewed focus at those different priorities and goals. I see a hand. Would you like me to pause for a question? Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I was on
Okay.
mute.
Sorry, I can't see many people on my screen. Go ahead.
Looking ahead to 2023, there is a zoning issue coming up, which could potentially add 1,170 families to Westwood. So I just want to make sure that if you haven't kind of had conversations with the Planning Commission, nothing's been approved yet, but it should be on your radar because it could stress our school system.
Okay, that is definitely something to follow up on. Thank you. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about each of these priorities. So as I said, school budgets are largely about people. And when we look at our major budget categories, you can see that quite clearly. So 85% of our budget is salaries. This is very typical for any school district and certainly is consistent with many, many years of our district budget. Just to break that down a little bit, of those salaries, 84% of our district employees in the budget belong to bargaining units, and they're subject to collective bargaining agreements. We have 5 bargaining units, and as I mentioned, we'll be going into negotiations this spring with teachers, custodians, and administrative assistants. In addition to those folks, another 10% of our staff are instructional staff who are outside of bargaining units. So those are occupational therapists, ABA tutors, literacy paras, tech support, a variety of different job functions. And then 6% of our staff are on individual contracts. So these are school administrators, and then some sort of one-off job roles like our building use coordinator. As I said, enrollment shifts are not really a significant driver as far as we can tell in the FY23 budget. We have been talking for years about shifts in enrollment, and here's kind of where we are at this point. So at the middle school, after several years of significant increases, we peaked in FY18. The population got up to about 800 students at the middle school, and then it began to decline. And so in FY20, the decline was enough that we were able to take some staffing cuts to adjust for that change in enrollment. We are not seeing a significant change in enrollment projected for the next 5 years on our enrollment projections. And so the current staffing level in general education, we believe, is sufficient. And so you'll see that this proposed budget really does not propose any increase in instructional staff at the middle school. Similarly, the Westwood High School enrollment peaked in FY19. It kind of hovered at the top for a couple of years, and then it started this projected, like, very gradual decline in FY21. The decline wasn't really significant enough to warrant cuts in FY21, but in the spring of FY20, June of FY20, so the FY21 budget was already passed. We were, as you may recall, in shutdown at that point, and we felt like we needed to make a lot of changes in the budget in anticipation of having to respond and create a new model for the following year. And so at that time, we cut 5.4 FTE at the high school to respond to pandemic needs at the elementary. We basically shifted where we had our resources. We then analyzed the impact of those cuts and looked at our budget priorities. We looked at things like trends in student elective choices and whatnot. And we decided that we would memorialize those cuts in FY22. So those cuts have now been taken. Because of the projected decline in enrollment, we decided that the cuts were sustainable and we didn't want to add back in the FTE, knowing that we were soon going to be cutting it. And so we've done that analysis again for the FY23 budget, and we think that the current staffing level in Gen Ed is sufficient at the high school as well. At the elementary, it's interesting. So as staff has been cut at the secondary level, what we've been doing is actually reallocating those FTEs to the elementary to support the enrollment trends there and our class size policies. So again, back in spring 2020 during shutdown, we made an adjustment. We significantly increased elementary Gen Ed staffing for last year's hybrid model, because we really prioritized in-person learning for our youngest learners. We had our KN1 kids back in person 4 days a week from the get-go, and we're able to bring back other grades also. So we invested our resources there. In FY22, we returned elementary staffing to typical levels, and we added 3.0 FTE Gen Ed teachers. And that was because, as part of our stabilization and recovery process, we identified a top priority of keeping class sizes favorable at the elementary level. Our current average class size at elementary across the district is 17.8, which is a very, very good number. And so in FY23, the budget proposes to keep elementary Gen Ed staffing at the current level, which is 70 class sections. We are looking at that elementary enrollment, and I just want to quickly put this chart up. So this chart really just rolls forward the students who are currently in classes, and then it takes a look at anticipated kindergarten enrollment. And right now we have census numbers, and so these are this chart kind of represents the kindergartners that we can see in the census. And I will say that for many years that that census number really turned out to be pretty accurate. We would kind of look at, what we could see and then what actually happened, and they really strongly correlated. But we've seen a bit of a change in that. And I think that this may be something that we just have to factor in at this point. And so we think that those kindergarten numbers will likely increase this spring and summer. And our budget proposal, keeping our 70 Gen Ed sections, does plan for that scenario. So I just wanted to quickly show you a snapshot of what happened for us this year. And so back when we were, we've taken a look at what happened and the anticipated enrollment sort of at this time last year versus actual by grade. And you can see what happened here. This is a net number. There was movement in and out of the district. But overall, we had an increase of 39 students at the elementary level. And, what was interesting about this in particular and a little challenging is that that total of 39 wasn't evenly spread across grades, as you can see, and it also wasn't evenly spread across schools. And so, we needed to respond to that, and we did successfully by adding a K1 section at the Downey School. But you can see we ended up here with 20 more kindergartners than we could see in that census data a year ago. And, generally speaking, at the primary grades was where we saw the increase. And for some reason, we just saw a really big increase at Downey. So I think that we do need to to plan for that kind of increase that certainly matches our official enrollment projections, that we should expect that. I will say that this is a little unique for Westwood, that you may have read in the news that statewide public school enrollment has gone down significantly. So the October 1, 2020 report last fall showed a decrease of about 30,000 students statewide in public schools. And many people thought that that would rebound as we came out of last year. But on this year's October 1 report, it actually decreased by about another 3,700 kids. That really doesn't match our experience. A lot of my colleagues are wondering where their kindergartners are. They are not, they're seeing a real decrease in kindergarten enrollment, and perhaps they are in Westwood based on our experience. I don't know. So we are planning for that. Okay, so finally, just a word on student needs and strategic priorities. So in FY23, our budget continues robust funding in curriculum and instruction. And I want to say a quick word about that, because I think it's an area of the budget where maybe it's not always immediately apparent what we're doing. So you'll see that the line items in curriculum and instruction don't really change a lot from year to year. But what does change is the decisions we make about how we're going to spend that money. And so this is where we really see like the annual prioritization of funds. And so I can tell you that in FY23, for example, some of our major initiatives is that we'll be purchasing updated middle school math instructional materials. We are going to be reviewing and purchasing core elementary social studies materials, especially in grades 3 to 5. We're really interested in aligning and providing consistency from classroom to classroom, and also providing professional development for teachers, continuing our efforts to integrate social emotional learning into curriculum and classroom routines. And then, of course, the FY23 budget continues to be about stabilization and long-term recovery. The good news is that we've made a significant investment in Westwood over the last 3 budgets. We have a strong foundation in terms of academic support. We've added a number of positions, including those gen ed teachers, including math and literacy specialists, some department heads at the middle school and high school academic support. For FY23, therefore, the top priority is in the social, emotional, behavioral, mental health realm. Those requests in that area was absolutely the theme that was coming from our principals and our cost center leaders. And so this proposed budget reflects this need that we think is very apparent right now. So, the proposed budget represents a 3.5% increase over FY22. And that proposed increase is in line with increases over the last several years. Our major budget categories, the slide really just kind of underscores what we talked about before, that salaries are by far the biggest driver in the budget, as you can see here. What we do want to point out on this slide, though, is kind of a strange anomaly for this year, and it really is just a shift in where we're accounting for things. And so, and it's a change in our strategy of how we're using some of our federal grant money. So we get a federal grant, it's called the IDEA grant, and to support special education. We have been applying it as an offset to salaries to pay for our instructional assistant salaries. However, what we've decided to do is move where we're applying those grant funds to the non-salary line. And then correspondingly, the town funds that had been applied to non-salary will now be applied to salary. And it's really just a strategic shift because we think that doing that will allow us to basically to generate more revenue through the Medicaid reimbursement process. And so we aren't sure how that's all going to work out, but we think it is worth a try to see if we can generate a little more revenue there. And so I point this out because it's really just a shift in how we're accounting for things, but it might look like the percent change is kind of strange. So, if you add up these numbers, they are the same as adding up these numbers, right? It's just where the money is accounted for. In terms of what the meaningful non-accounting change is, This represents a 3.7% increase in salary. So that accounts for steps, lanes, and existing or collective bargaining contracts with a reserve also included because, as I said, we are going into collective bargaining, and then also accounting for new positions. That 3.7% incremental change in salaries is right in line with what it's been the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, it's pretty low. The last 5 or 6 years, it's ranged from 3.7% to 4.5%. So this just shows how the budget is built year over year. You can see our increase in contractual obligations. And then we are proposing 11.3 FTE in new positions. We have some changes in our non-salary accounts and offsets. And that gets us to our recommended budget of $51.7 million. So what I've done here is just list for you the positions that are included, the new positions that are included in the proposed budget, and the budget narrative that I provided gives lots of detail about these positions. But I just want to highlight a couple of ideas. So the top 3 positions, I would say, are really, they're directly speaking to that idea of focusing on student support. And so the first position here, we're proposing to add 1.0 FTE high school adjustment counselor. This was the top budget priority that was expressed by Principal Davenport at the high school. And this would go directly to supporting counseling needs, particularly the 9th grade at the high school. Similarly, the elementary principals collaborated to identify this as their top elementary priority. It's to add 1.2 FTE elementary adjustment counselors. What we're proposing here is that these positions would be funded using our ESSER 3 funds. So that is the federal money that is coming to schools to help with pandemic recovery. You know, you may hear about some districts that got millions of dollars in ESSER 3 funds. ESSER funding is tied to the Title I formula, which has to do with income levels of our students. And so Westwood for ESSER 3 received approximately $170,000. And so what we are proposing to do is to split that funding in half. We're allowed to carry this funding over for 2 years. And we would fund year 1 of this, these positions out of ESSER, and then year 2, we would take the second half of the ESSER funds. Right now, we really are thinking of these as temporary positions that we're going to put in place for a couple of years and sort of reassess where we are at the end of that 2 years. And the way this would be allocated is it would be 0.4 FTE to each of our 3 largest schools, which is Martha Jones Downey and Sheehan. We're also proposing a full-time middle school dean of students. This was the top priority coming from the middle school principal. We really think this would be very helpful at the middle school. We want to be able to provide positive, proactive responses to student behavioral needs. And frankly, we want to ensure that the principal can really maintain his focus on teaching and learning issues. And so we think that this is actually very critical right now, given some of the things that we're seeing happening with students. And this would bring our model into alignment with the high school. So I'm going to flip ahead. I'll come back to this slide in a second, but I just want to show you sort of the big picture here of how those proposed positions fit into our overall structure of social and emotional supports for students. And so, as I said, we want to kind of align the high school and the middle school. Right now at the high school, we have a principal, assistant principal, and a dean of students. We'd like to have a similar model at the middle school. And you know, at the high school, the model works well. The assistant principal and dean of students support students. They respond to behavioral issues. They conduct bullying investigations. The difference in these roles is that the assistant principal supervises and evaluates teachers. The dean really provides student programming, family outreach. We think a similar position at the middle school would be very helpful. Our elementary schools are small, they have a principal. Here, we now have a continuum of services across all 3 levels that are specialized programs to support social, emotional needs of kids, provide a therapeutic milieu. It's called different things at different levels, but staffed similarly. And then we're looking to expand the folks who are providing direct services and counseling to students. So that's sort of the big picture. Back to this, then, our only gen ed teaching position is we're requesting an addition of 0.4 FTE, high school social studies. We are looking to increase the director of safety and security by 0.2. You may recall that in FY21, in that budget, we had approved the addition, the creation of a 0.4 director of safety and security. And then it had to be cut in FY22 as we prioritized what we needed to do for the pandemic. In the current budget, FY22, we built it back, but only at 0.2. We've posted for that position. We'll be hiring it for the second half of the year. And so basically, we just need to add back in that other 0.2 to get the job to 0.4. The next several items are related to needs in special education, a special education building substitute for the Downey School, 2.0 FTE ABA tutors, and 2.0 FTE instructional assistants. These are positions that support the services that are required on students' IEPs. Related to that METCO expansion, we would be hiring a full-time elementary METCO advisor, but that would be fully funded by the METCO grant, so there's no impact on the operating budget. We're proposing a 0.5 FTE high school specialized program transition coach. We do continue to serve some of our students who are on IEPs up to age 22. And this is a position that would work with those students to support their work in the community, their transition to community college. We think that's quite important. And then we have a couple of administrative assistant positions, a half-time administrative assistants for the facilities department. We don't currently have any administrative support for facilities. We have a new facilities director. We think this is a good time to make this transition, as our new facilities director will certainly have increased responsibilities around the Hanlon Deerfield project. We want him to be able to give that his full attention. And then we'd like to add a half-time administrative assistant for the business department. There would be no budget impact because that person would really be responsible for things having to do with our revolving accounts, and therefore that salary could be offset by those revolving accounts. And then a few words about non-salary. So some of the highlights here in operations, we have included in our proposal an increase in regular ed transportation costs, so the yellow buses. This is the last year of our transportation contract, so we're in the process of negotiating that now, but we think probably a 3% increase is typical. We need to make an increase in our legal services and other expenses for attorney fees and our school committee policy review process. That just reflects the reality that attorney fees have increased and what the cost of that policy review will be. In Gen Ed, we have a variety of technology needs that go directly to our educational programs. And we have a modest increase in subscriptions in curriculum and instruction to support teachers' use of an online assessment tool. And then in special education, as I mentioned, we've really budgeted very tightly here. So we have included an escalation for anticipated tuitions and placements of only $27,000. And we've budgeted for an increase in contracted services of $10,000. I do want to say a couple of words about this because last year we had talked about the fact that contracted services has historically been significantly overspent. And we we had laid out a multi-year plan to adjust that line item. And so last year's budget included an increase of $85,000 to contracted services as year one of what we imagined would probably be a 4-year plan. As we looked at all the priorities for this year, we have decided to pause on that multi-year plan for next year. As I mentioned before, we do have this one-time increase in that IDA American Rescue Plan special education grant, and we think that gives us a cushion here that we can apply. And that allowed us to move forward some of our other priorities. We do think we're going to need to come back to this though, but we actually think it would help to get another year under our belts and be able to start to strip out some of the COVID impacts from that contracted services line and have a better handle on what's happening in that account. Slides are not advancing. Okay. Here we go. Okay. And so I've mentioned some things about special education funding sources before, but I just want to review these for a second because there are a couple of significant things this year. So just to remind you that special education is funded through multiple sources. And so one is town funds. So money appropriated to the operating budget through the town meeting process. We also have our special education reserve for unanticipated costs, and we have been able to dedicate some funds to building that balance in recent years. Then, as we've talked about, we have a federal IDA grant. This amount varies from year to year, and we have to estimate that during the budget process. And then we're likely, we think, to have unspent funds from that FY22 additional American Rescue Plan allocation of $250,000 or $215,000, and we can carry unused funds from that into FY23. And then finally, we have something called Circuit Breaker. And so Circuit Breaker is state funding that provides partial reimbursement for the very high costs of special education placements. For example, if somebody went to a residential placement. What happens though is when expensive tuitions drop, then of course the reimbursement drops as well. It involves a claiming process and it's paid in arrears. And so in a given fiscal year, we have to be able to cover the tuition expenses, but we can then apply circuit breaker funding in subsequent years as an offset to the budget. So circuit breaker is very, very important and helpful, but it's also like a little bit unpredictable at times. So the two things that I want to call out for this year, first of all, is this idea of the special education reserve. So that $27,000 that we've proposed as an increase in special ed tuition is really accounting for actual students, known placements right now at this moment. We have not sort of built in any contingency for things that are unanticipated. And so, but in sort of our risk analysis, we've decided that unanticipated costs would be handled through the special education reserve for next year. And then, as I mentioned, we're likely to have some unspent funds. And so between those two factors, we feel comfortable with the analysis that we've made of what we need to do for FY23. And so our special education focus, we continue to educate nearly all of our special education students in district. That's something that we're very proud of. Only about 0.5% of students are learning in out of district placements. We very much want to be able to educate our students in their home community to the extent possible. And it happens that because we have built out over the years some very good programs, it's high quality and it's also cost effective for us to do that. The focus for FY23 is to maintain our current programming and service levels in special ed, of course, to meet our legal and regulatory responsibilities, and to continue to provide a robust ESY program. We think that will be the case for several years. And as I mentioned, increasing mental health supports during this period of recovery from COVID impacts. So just looking beyond FY23, you know as well as I do that the budget development process is really looking at a bunch of priorities and making some choices. And so there were certainly things that we discussed at length in developing the budget that didn't make it into the FY23 budget, but that we anticipate coming back to at another time. So increasing for our ELL staffing. We, have been talking about this for a couple of years, but we really would like to be able to open an additional preschool classroom. We made some cuts to library staffing in response to pandemic priorities. We'd like to restore that. We had a lot of conversation about expanding elementary specials. We'd love to add in some other options there. We would like to expand our peer program, which is our specialized district-wide program at the elementary level for students with moderate autism spectrum disorder. And at some point, I really would like to talk about adding a human resources director to the school department. We don't have an HR director, even though we have about 600 and some employees. I will say we enjoy a lot of support from the town HR department, and they are incredible. But we're a big organization and could really use some focus in that area. Okay, and so I'm going to turn it over to Lemma just to talk about the capital budget for a few minutes.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to start with a slide of 5 years of annual capital budgets. And this is just a high level overview of our annual capital proposal for this year. And to give you context, and starting with FY19, you can see that there was between FY19 and FY20 an increase in the town's investment in capital for the schools. So we went from 867 to over $1 million invested in capital across, in general, pretty steady group of investments and areas. So we have a commitment to both renewing technology, FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment in the district, copiers and vehicles. So these are things that we replace on a regular basis. And then we have building improvements, so repairs to HVAC, roofing, and other building improvements. And these are the steady categories that have held for a while. In FY23, you'll see I've highlighted the HVAC, roofing, and the improvements lines because we do anticipate a good amount of work will be done in these categories. And then the only other thing I want to note about these figures is that our capital budget is really developed with like a multi-year view here. And so we've developed a plan for the improvements that we may need to undertake, and that plan looks forward. And so in technology, for example, that 130K that you see in FY23 would be funding that we would be setting aside and not necessarily spending immediately, but because we anticipate replacement of one-to-one devices coming up in future years. So we are forecasting future needs and setting aside funds for that. Roofing is the other example of that, a very classic example that we discuss all the time because we've set aside funds in roofing for more major replacements. And those don't happen every year, but because they're high cost items, we try to chip away at the big cost by putting something aside every year. So that's our overview. And on the next slide, I have some potential projects that I've just listed out to give you more specific flavor for what these look like. And the first 5 bullets here fall into those categories of HVAC, roofing, and building improvements. You'll see that we may need to do some roof replacements in select areas. This is not the entire buildings necessarily, but based on the recommendations of engineers and experts. If there are replacements that are needed at Sheehan, Martha Jones, or the middle school, those are the ones that we are watching most closely. We are evaluating the condition of HVAC units on the roofs at the middle school. These are units that are starting to approach the end of their useful life. And so we're monitoring them and determining which ones would be first up for replacement. There's a targeted AC installation. That's a smaller cost item that might happen at the Sheehan. That sometimes we have student needs to drive those improvements. And then there are other building improvements at Sheehan, as well as elsewhere in the district that might be done to improve safety or in response to other engineering recommendations or long-term plans. More in the cluster of FF&E and technology, you'll see we are addressing some requests at the high school and middle school. There's a request for library circulation desk replacements. We have, huge circulation desks that are no longer needed because we've become much more nimble in the use of the library. So that's a proposal that's on the table. We have a request for a kiln for the ceramic program at the high school. Chromebook replacements are slated for grades 6 and 9 every year, but we also are looking at replacing iPads for elementary technology packs and the high school language lab. So these are some of those technology projects. And I'm forecasting and preparing for a significant one-to-one device refresh in FY26. That's when we think that one would start to hit. And this is kind of when a lot of the devices that we purchased in response to the pandemic would start to be aging. And so we'll need to replace those to keep the kids working on devices that are functioning well for them. So that's a taste of capital for us.
Great, thanks, Lemma. And so next steps, this Thursday is the school committee's public budget hearing. And we do have a meeting on the books with the FinCom's education subcommittee. I said anticipated, but I think that's actually on the books now. And of course, we'll be back here in March on our way to town meeting in May, as you are well aware. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Emily. Fabulous as always. So I know that you were sent a couple of questions about the METCO program in advance.
Mhm.
I think you addressed these in your comments, but I just want to be sure. Do you want to just refer to the questions that you were set in advance and
Sure.
Specifically address them if you feel like you didn't in your earlier comments?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I do want to clarify because the questions I think sort of speak to a misunderstanding about how METCO is funded. So METCO is a state program. It doesn't have anything to do with the city of Boston. It's a state program and it's funded annually by the state legislature as a line item in the state budget. That the program, the funds are then overseen by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE. And they contract with METCO Inc. To oversee the application process and student intake. And so we receive a grant. And the amount of grant that is allocated to a local district is based on a formula that is a per pupil formula. And so, as I said, we are set to receive about $250,000 more. And that's because as we expand to the elementary level, we would bring in about 32 to 35 additional students for the first year across grades K to 5. The idea being that after this one-time expansion, you bring kids in at the younger grades. And so that is how that works. In addition, though, to the METCO grant funding, when we bring students into our enrollment, then our enrollment number for the purpose of Chapter 70 money also increases. So the Chapter 70 money also follows the students here. METCO, however, is what's considered a marginal seat program. And what we mean by that is that the METCO grant fully covers the cost of the program, that being METCO program staff, transportation, which is actually a significant amount of the budget, and then some very smaller things, professional development, community outreach. It's marginal seat because if we bring a kid in to a classroom that say has 16 students, and then we add another student, 17, it doesn't increase our staffing costs, right? And so the per pupil question isn't really, I think, the right question. It's about whether or not we cover the cost of the program through the grant. And the answer to that is yes. And so I think that is it. Oh, I was asked, like, where would we see that? So you would see those program costs included in Cost Center 150, which is curriculum instruction. So that would be the Director of Equity and Community Partnerships, who's the person who oversees the whole program. And then we have METCO support positions, one for each level, elementary, middle school, and high school. And then you would also see it in the transportation budget because our Boston students arrive by bus from Boston.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Emily. There was another question about the teacher diversification grant.
Yep, so I think I did address that. So that is just an initiative from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. It's a program that they have. The goal of it is to increase the diversity of educators in Massachusetts. And so this is some funding to support local districts who want to try to get creative. And you know, the issue in Massachusetts, I would say, is largely it's kind of a pipeline issue. And so we're thinking of some things in Westwood, for example. We'd like to use that money to be able to have some paid internships in our summer programs for high school students. The idea being that if we give them some experience working in an educational setting, and then they go off to college and they're interested in education, we would guarantee them an interview if they want to come back to Westwood and work here. So that's an example. Some other things is that we could provide tuition reimbursement to some of our staff to support their efforts to go back to graduate school if they want to study and become a licensed educator. And again, we would support them in those efforts and kind of reach out to people that we think we'd like to grow our own, so to speak, and then be able to hire them as teachers later.
Great, thank you. So those were the questions we received in advance. If anybody has any other questions for Emily, please raise your hand and Jane will unmute you. Angela, I think I see your hand. Do I? And you're muted. Jane, will you unmute her, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hi. Excellent presentation, as always. Just one question regarding the increase in the extended school year. So is it safe to say that COVID is the driving factor of that, or would that be considered an unanticipated cost that we'll see for future budgeting?
I think it is safe to say that largely, like, the scope of the increase to ESY is a COVID impact. So when we were going through the process this year with our special education teams of determining who is eligible for ESY services, I would say we took a very generous view. We really wanted to try to get kids into the program and try to shore up some skills to position kids well for the fall. So yes, that's a COVID impact. What I would say, though, is that I think that COVID impact is going to be lingering, right? So I think we'll see sort of a similar expansion next year and maybe the year after that as well.
Thanks, Emily. Peter, I think you have your hand up. Jane, would you unmute Peter?
Yes. Okay, I think, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
I have another question about the METCO program. As I understand your answer, the METCO program does not add to the cost covered by the Westwood taxpayers. I'd like to know if that's correct. But also, I wonder if you could give me an idea of how big this program is. How many students are there in the METCO program?
Sure. Yes, that your understanding is correct, that the grant covers the cost of the program. So we currently have, I believe, in the neighborhood of 51 students in grades 6 to 12. The size of the program has been pretty steady for decades. And now with this expansion, we'll be bringing in an additional 32 to 36. And I will just say that it's really important to go about the expansion that way, because when you're bringing children into this program, you want to make sure that you create a cohort of kids. So the expansion will happen in one elementary school at the Hanlon Elementary. That's a place that we have lots of room in terms of our class sizes right now. We've got rooms with 14, 15 kids. And so we can bring in we can bring in, say, 6 kids in a grade, and we have room and can still have like a good cohort of support and also great class sizes.
Congrats, Emily. I know you've been working on that for a long time.
We've been working on that for about 20 years. Yes. So it's pretty exciting.
I thought I saw another hand. Did I not? George. Jane, would you unmute George? And then Jim after that. George.
Excellent presentation. I just wanted to go over, I had 4 points. One of them you just answered by your answer of strategically placing the elementary METCO students that are coming in. Because as I look at the numbers, specifically the largest school population at the elementary level of 297 for the Downey School, there are some classroom sizes and I'm looking at the anticipated level where it's grade 4, where the classroom sizes is getting to be like 22 and 23 kids per class, which,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not sure what the standard is in the town now, but that to me is a high classroom size. When you look and you shift over to, say, the Hanlon, and it's 14 kids in a classroom, you know, I understand that the schools are neighborhood schools, but when there's a classroom getting one teacher to 14 kids, and then there's another classroom where the main teacher is teaching 24 kids.
Mhm. Yeah.
it-
So I think you're raising some important points, and I want to reframe two things. So the first is that we have elementary class size guidelines, and class sizes of 14 and 15 are very, very small. They are lower than the class size guideline, right? And so what we have
nobody
right
would
now.
complain about small
No, I
classes.
know. So right now, what we have at Hanlon and Deerfield is anomalously small class sizes. And so that, of course, is the story of the Hanlon Deerfield consolidation operationally, right? We've been talking about the impact of having very small schools where if you have, say, 28 kids in a grade, you have a choice between one section of 28 or 2 of 14. Right. So when we consolidate, and we sort of modeled that in the whole building project, process, you have an opportunity to kind of rectify that and to smooth things out a bit. So I anticipate that will happen. But to your question, Downey right now is the school that has sort of consistently the biggest class sizes in the district, still within class size guidelines, I think with the exception of one.
Yeah,
So our class size.
I know the one.
So our class sizes, our class size guidelines are for K to 3, 18 to 22, and for 4 and 5, 18 to 24. So the class size chart right now in the district, I would say if you're interested in small class sizes, is the best that it's been in,
Except
probably
at
20 years.
Except at the Downey and the Sheehan. I mean, when you have the classrooms of 47, 46, that's 2 classrooms of 24, and that's kind of rough. And specifically the one with 65, an additional teacher there wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to break the classroom size down to maybe 17 or 18 kids rather than the 24. But that's a different conversation for a different time.
Right. And I will say, George, that the 70 gen ed teachers, we will wait and decide how to allocate them in like late spring when we have a better sense of what's happening with the enrollment
Population.
numbers. Yeah.
My second question, you answered, Peter, very impressively hit the nail on the head with, it will not cost anything to the town, except when it increases the size. But as you said, you would strategically place that to avoid it. Can you add for the presentation on the 15th to your wish list of things you want a dollar value and cost to those?
Sure.
Because some of those items, I think, you can always kick the can down the road and hope for down the road, but some may be in a more immediate and beneficial thing that we maybe or hypothetically you could add to the budget now, but I wouldn't want to make a judgment on that unless we had a value to it.
Mm-hmm.
And my last question, can you do that for the meeting on the 15th?
Yes.
And then the last question I have is, I'm looking at the capital budget, and I'm just curious when you would expect a decrease in the capital budget. What year, probably year 4 or 5 from now, a decrease in the capital budget based on the fact that we got a brand new school and we're not going to have to do a lot of new roofs or big repairs to 40% of the school, because we're taking the two, I don't want to use the word poor, but not in good condition schools that probably drain a lot of the capital budget right now,
Mm-hmm.
by putting them with a brand new school, which shouldn't need a lot of capital work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so I would have to give that some thought. I mean, the first thing I would say is it depends a lot on the capital budget is going to depend a lot on what's happening with Sheehan. So that's an interesting question. But But in addition to that, our capital needs far exceed on an annual basis our annual allocation. And so, I want to be clear that if we were to build an annual capital budget from zero, saying like, this is what we think we really need, the number would be much, much higher than that. But we kind of know that this is like the budget that we're working within on an annual basis. And so, we work within it. And so that's sort of a short way of saying I don't really anticipate it going down, to be honest with you. But Lemma, if I'm mischaracterizing the situation, let me know.
No, I think that that's true. I mean, in looking at the facilities condition index, we have a listing of our major equipment and just their age. And a good amount of that is, some is brand new and we've replaced in recent years, but a good amount of that is aging. And I don't think it's only attributed to Hanlon and Deerfield. I think it's just the ongoing repair and maintenance that has to happen in our buildings in general. Even the high school, which feels like the brand new building still and looks wonderful, has some aging equipment. So the high school chiller is going to need to be replaced someday soon, and that's going to come at a big price tag. I think the most recent quote we had for that was $175K. So that alone would just eat up such a big chunk of this capital budget. And this is why we try to plan for these things and chip away at it by setting aside funds. And for other significant items that can't be covered in annual capital, we propose a separate capital article. But I think there is a good deal of work.
You have a set amount of money that you're going to use for capital every year, and then you allocate it.
Right.
I think that's what I'm getting. My last question is probably an unpopular question. With the potential of, and Diane, I would defer to you with the correct terminology, affordable housing, low-income housing, I'm not sure what the term is. With the potential of that coming in the future, which again, I'm not sold on it. I'd like to know what the town will sacrifice in potential grants and find out what that dollar value is and see if it's worth getting it or waiving on it and not having affordable housing. But that's not for my question for you. My question for you is, if this affordable housing goes up, and say it goes up in, the Weatherby area, or if it goes up in the School Street area, wherever it goes up, I really believe you need to be really actively involved with where it's going, because when the University Station went up, I mean, I've been in the same house for 36 years. It just put a drain and a stress on the Downey. When different developments go up, they've got to put a stress on the school. Some schools can't handle any more kids. The Downey is, I think, one of them that I don't think if you put 10 more kids in the Downey, you're going to be teaching kids in the gym. So I think if you could be actively involved with the planning board on where they're hoping to put this affordable housing, knowing how many units will be established and what the potential families that are being there, I think that'll really impact the schools, unfortunately, in a negative way.
So
Emily,
yep.
are you aware of what he's speaking about? This is the new statute. The state has passed a law that requires towns that have commuter rail stations to have housing built within or available, not built, but zoned within those certain amount of distance from the commuter rail station for families. And that's what this is. And the planning board has been working and just did a presentation to the select board to comply with that law.
Yeah.
And it's certainly a long-term issue, but it is indeed, I mean, this select board has raised it several times, encouraging that they would of course work with you, even though it's over the very long term, but for you to be involved in those discussions.
Right. Well, I absolutely would want to be involved in those discussions. And I do feel like a school superintendent, I want to be clear that we welcome all children to the Westwood Public Schools. Our experience with University Station was that we had good information about what the projected impact was of that development. And I have to say those projections were actually right on target when we look back at what happened, and we planned for that, and we're able to, to make the change. And so I would imagine we would have to do a similar kind of process.
Thanks, Emily. So we have two more questions, Jim and Chris. So Jane, do you want to unmute Jim?
Thank you. Emily, just a sec. Jane, to answer George's question, I asked Pam about the grants that we had received, and she sent an email, I don't know, probably the beginning of the year. Can you circulate that email with her response to the board?
Sure can.
So, thank you. Emily, just two quick questions. Going back to your 2020 fiscal year 22 budget highlights, you stated that the ESY was over budget. How much was it over budget by?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Lemma, do you happen to know?
My ballpark is about 150,000. I would have to look at the line items. And
We can get that to you, but the 200K that we got in the grant is taking care of that problem.
Offset it, but yeah, okay. So there wasn't anything coming back to us.
No.
Okay.
No.
And then you state that the balance in special education reserve account is not impacted. How much is in the reserve account?
I'm going to look to Lemma again for that.
I think we have 500 now in the reserve account. I know we also have some funding in some Medicaid accounts. So Medicaid revenue, when we do get it as a reimbursement for claimed expenses that are eligible for Medicaid reimbursement, that also is a funding source that we could use to apply to special education expenses. So between the special education reserve account, which is a formal account that now has 500 at least in it, and some other Medicaid reimbursement funds that are accessible to us, I feel that we're more than sufficiently cushioned for some unexpected expenses in special education.
Yeah, so that's a healthy balance, and we feel comfortable with what we've proposed. To sort of give a sense of the order of magnitude, though, one residential placement could be $200,000, right? So you can have an unanticipated impact that's fairly significant. But you don't want to budget for that necessarily, because I mean, we can't, accommodate that kind of contingency.
If I can expound on that, I don't know how the METCO students are selected, but would it be possible that a special need METCO student would arrive?
So the METCO enrollment, I mean, it's really a lottery system. It's not like, we're reviewing student files. So certainly a student with an IEP could come into the METCO program. However, the way that the program works is that if a student's special education needs exceeds the capacity of the district to service the student in-house, then the student goes back to Boston. So we would not have any out-of-district special education placements.
But you may have additional out-of-pocket expenses above and beyond the funding.
We certainly could have a student who, for instance, has an IEP and has a learning center class, or something like that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Chris. Jane, would you unmute Chris for us, please? There
Got
you
it.
go.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. Emily, you said in your main presentation that you were decreasing a line called maintenance by $50,000. And then Lemma detailed a bunch of capital projects that many people would call maintenance, albeit maintenance of a more long-term. So what was the $50,000 decrease in your maintenance from? Is it cheaper cleaning supplies?
Now, I think that's referring to PPE, right? So we had put 50K in this year for PPE, and we zeroed that out for next year.
That's probably a legitimate decrease then. Thank you.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Mike Gay.
Yes, again, thank you so much for the presentation. Coming off the Hanlon Deerfield project vote at special town meeting, which we're all excited about, looking at the budget, and I just want to make this clear for everybody watching at home, there are really no impacts to your fiscal 23 budget as it relates to that project.
Correct.
Or are there any increases or decreases that may have been hidden that you took that project into consideration for?
No, so I want to make clear we are actively thinking about, the consolidation and planning for that. But no, in the FY23 budget, no, there really are not impacts. Yep.
Awesome.
All right. I don't see any other questions. I'm going to reserve one for myself. Emily, every year you tell us what the staff have asked for to be put on like the wish list.
Mhm.
And so we get that from you every year. I'm just really curious, are you able to meet those wish lists over time, and do they change? I don't want you to give us any big report, but if maybe next time you come and you think about it, if you could let us know about that.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do that.
It'd be fun. Okay. Emily and Lena, we are going to thank you so much for your presentations. Hang out if you want. Maya, thank you for coming, or just take the night and go have a glass of wine.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Okay, thanks to the members. Great questions as always. So we are going to welcome Pam Dukeman, Chris Coleman, and Mike Walsh to talk about the municipal 23 budget. I believe, Pam, you're probably going to be the lead on this, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, you are mistaken. I'm going to take just a minute and say hello first.
Right.
Then I think Chris is going to step in, and then Pam. Pam's the cleanup hitter. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. I just wanted to tell you that we went very conservative with the budget, as we usually do, especially when I happen to be chair. I like to make sure that there are no surprises that we are unaware of. And so right now we have several things which are not yet on the warrant. They are still in motion, and whether or not they make it in time for your second public hearing is still unknown. I personally don't like to put anything up in front of you before we have an opportunity to make sure the details are in place. I think it's unfair to you, and I think it's unfair to the residents to put anything up before you until it's ready and that we can answer all the questions. So there are several things still in the air which are going on. And I'm sure you've heard rumors about them, but they are nowhere near ready for town meeting yet. So what Pam has in front of you, she has all the numbers for those projects and for the things that we're doing, but there could be others. But honestly, at this point in time, we can't tip our hand because we don't know if they'll make it in time for town meeting. So I just want you to know that. So Chris, I'll let you step up. Thank you. And I'll be listening if you have any questions after Pam's presentation.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Michael. You actually covered what I was going to be discussing at the opening, so I won't echo that. And I know people are eager to hear what Pam has to say. Madam Chair, I'll just make myself available after Pam's presentation if the members have any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Pam, you got the floor.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So we have two presentations to go through with you. One, the municipal budget, and we'll go through that quickly. And then we have what we call the overall budget, which will combine the municipal budget, the school budget, capital, all together, and with the revenue that's supporting that budget. So I am going to share my screen and just start with the municipal.
Pam, can I interrupt you for one quick question?
Sure.
Do you want to have questions during your presentation, or would you like us to hold all of our questions till the end?
Sorry, I'm fine either way. If we want to, when I finish the municipal, do any questions specifically for municipal, that might work.
Okay, that's what
but if there's anything as we go through this, if people want to ask, that's fine. I know we got some questions last night that members had sent in. I think most of those apply more to the overall budget. So we'll go answer those as I get to that one.
Okay, so I'm yes, that's great. And I've been getting some responses from the commission saying at the end is better. So if it's okay with you, we'll hold our questions till the end and go right ahead.
Sure. So I'll go through this very quickly. We did produce the municipal budget document, and you've all gotten that. So this is just a few slides from that book, just to kind of walk you through where that budget is at this point. So the municipal budget, what does that provide for? Really, one of the major things with the municipal budget is how diverse it is, how diverse the various services are that we're providing throughout the community, all areas of the community, all age groups of our residents. The majority of our budget is for public safety and public works. 65% of the municipal budget is for that area. You can see on the blue side here. And police and fire are 45% of the budget and DPW 20%. So that is the bulk of our services, our ongoing service delivery through public safety, public works out to the community. Then we also have a whole series of departments and services, again, for all ages of residents in town, young and old, through our Council on Aging program, our library, our recreation. So we're really providing a lot of program delivery through those departments. We then have departments and programs that we need to do kind of state required regulatory type functions, zoning, health, licensing, veterans, things like that. And then we do have kind of our administrative departments that support and oversee and help fund these other areas. So really that's always the challenge with the municipal budget, is that wide range of services that we're trying to reach, lots of different programming needs going on. Again, with the primary services, obviously, public safety, public works. Just looking at the budget, the largest component of our budget is salary. 80% of the municipal budget is salary. So very much just like the school budget that you heard Emily go through, you know, our programming is done through our staff. So our budget is very salary driven. And the majority of this budget is spent on our staff, police officers, firefighters, or DPW workers. So of the budget for FY23, a $22.6 billion budget, $18 million of that, again, or 80%, comes in the way of salary. So it's obviously a very heavy salary driven operation. So the budget for FY23 really strives to maintain the high level of services that we provide to the community, trying again to maintain the service delivery in all of those various areas. We have been continuing to focus, as we've done in the last couple of years, on our building maintenance, properly maintaining both our new and existing facilities. So we've really done a lot with that in the last couple of years. We heard from the community 10 or 15 years ago that we weren't maintaining our buildings and our property to the degree that we needed to. We've really made a focus on this. We have a building maintenance division now within the DPW that's really been put together. It's been enhanced over the last few budget cycles. We've done a much better job at maintaining properly our buildings, and I think people see that. We get that feedback. We're also looking to strengthen our human services division service delivery. Much like you've heard from the schools, coming out of the pandemic, we have seen a lot of extra need in some of the programs that we do in this area. Our youth and family services has waiting lists for many of the programmings that they're providing. And we'd like to be able to do more in that area as we help the community come out of COVID and continue forward. Couple of other things you'll see, again, this has been the last couple of years, but we've had additional needs in the town clerk area. Been a lot of different things happening, both with elections and other service deliveries. So we have been able to expand the budget to help with service delivery in that area. You'll see in the 23 budget, one item is to expand the branch library hours. That new facility is now built. And will be opening to the public. The staff is currently in that building, opening to the public, I think within the next couple of weeks or so, Chris, if that's correct. But because we now have that building, and because Youth and Family Service will be in that building on a regular work week cycle, as recreation will be in that building utilizing the community room. We want to expand the hours that the library is open so that we can get our residents into that facility. So we are accommodating that in the FY23 budget. I will want to point out with technology and automation has really helped us control staffing levels, particularly in some of our administrative areas. So even though we're seeing increases and changes to our population and some of the, our revenue areas, different things with taxation or different fees, we really continue to really rely on our IT department to help us with technology so that we can keep our staffing levels the same, but do more service that we need to do in those departments. I will point out there are currently no additional public safety positions in the FY23 budget. We're going to look at that at a later slide, but that is always an area that the select board is looking at and monitoring the need there of the staffing, and they will continue to do so. And again, we're very proud of the work that our departments have done to kind of respond to the COVID impact, the changes in service delivery that they've had to do, the direct services that our public safety departments have been able to do over this period. They've really done a terrific job. So just looking at some numbers here, this slide shows how the budget is broken up by our different service areas. So again, FY23, a $22.6 million budget. The bulk of that coming in public safety, 46% of the budget, or 10 million in public safety, and then another 4.7 million in public works. That's our other large area. Right now, the budget for FY23 is an $816,000 increase, or 3.7%. And of that increase, half of that, 424,000, is in the public works and public safety areas. So about 52% of the overall increase are in those two main areas of service. Looking a little bit more at the change in the budget year to year. So again, that $816,000 total increase for FY23 over the current year, most of that, 86% of that is coming in the salary line item. Just over 700,000 of that is in our salary line, a 4% increase. And that includes these major items that we're highlighting below. The bulk of that, just over $530,000, is for salary increases, contractual obligations for all staff throughout all departments. So that does include a COLA adjustment, any step increases, any other requirements per any of our collective bargaining contracts. So that's the bulk of the change in salary. We also have $40,000 additional salary to the town clerk's department. As I mentioned, we have had some changes and we have added some staff to that department actually in the current year for some of that additional election activity and simply overall service delivery. The town clerk's office is our most popular office that residents come to or call into for services. They also, if you've been into town hall and seen how we've been able to reorganize our building, the town clerk's office has taken over that main entry point into town hall. And so they are the front line kind of welcoming people into the town. So we have had an increase of staffing to help them in that department, and that will continue. We need in the budget FY23 about $40,000 to continue that support. Next in the library, as I mentioned, expanding the hours that the branch will be open and making sure that we're utilizing that new facility. That's about a $50,000 increase in the budget. We have also, as I mentioned, with building maintenance, some continued reorganization and adjustment of staffing levels in that division, particularly with some of the library custodians now shifting over to our DPW building maintenance budget and being able to expand their hours and their operations as a $23,000 increase for FY23. And then finally, we're looking, as I mentioned, to strengthen our staffing and service delivery ability in our human service division, $50,000 increase. So those are really the main changes in the staffing area for FY23. Next on the expense side. So as I mentioned, of the total increase, $114,000 of that is coming in the expense budget, or a 2.7% increase. So really not a lot here on the expense side. This table just lists a couple of the items that you'll see as you start to work through the budget. Police department, $17,000 increase in the expense line item, particularly for some additional training needs and uniform costs. Town clerk's expense item, $15,000, and that's based on the election cycle that we have in the FY23 year. The library budget, a $38,000 increase in expenses. Again, some of that related to the branch and the expense needs to kind of open and equip and get that up to speed. $27,000 in our building maintenance to continue those efforts to enhance what we're doing to maintain our buildings on an ongoing basis. And then just a small amount, $7,500 in our DPW street and traffic lighting budget. Some increased maintenance activity that they're having in that budget. So a relatively minor list of items that make up the bulk of that just over $110,000 increase on the expense side. Overall, looking at the municipal budget, it has been a budget that's had relatively stable growth for the last several years. The select board is committed to making sure that this budget has sustainable growth, that we're not growing beyond what we can sustain on an ongoing basis. So they look every year at the staffing needs. They are very cautious about adding to the budget. The line item here shows the budget growth over the last several years, and the table on the bottom, the percent changes each year. The growth for FY23, 3.7%. It's a little bit higher than it's been the last couple of years, but FY22, the current year, was 3.1%. So we have, over the last several years, been in that 3 to 3.5% range each year. Looking next just at public safety. As I mentioned, the most important area of our budget, 45% of our operation is in our police and fire area. And as I said, most of our funding in our budget in those departments is our staffing. So in recent years, as the FinCom knows, we've spent a lot of effort looking at our staffing level in public safety. That was a lot of discussion that occurred before the University Station project, and we've continued to look at that. We have, since FY14, right before the start of University Station, been able to add 23 public safety positions to police and fire departments. And this table shows you the staffing level over that period of time. And when you look at that, you can see in what years did we bring on staffing. As I mentioned, we're cautious when we're adding staffing. Because we always want to make sure that's sustainable. We never want to kind of add to our police and fire staffing only to, not be able to support that in budgets and have to decrease those departments. So we're very cautious, but we have had a cautious, steady increase to those departments over the last several years. As I mentioned, there are no new positions in the FY23 budget, but the select board continues to work with those departments and evaluate the staffing levels. I will point out that really more than other departments, our police and fire departments have been particularly impacted by the COVID pandemic in how they had to deliver services to the community. The fire department has also been impacted by the closing of Norwood Hospital. And I know we talked about this in our current year budget process with FinCom. With that hospital closed, and particularly the emergency room closed, the fire department has had a change in their ambulance service operations. Instead of delivering patients to Norwood Hospital, they've had to make longer trips, whether going to other neighboring hospitals or into Boston. So while the select board is not at this point making permanent changes, they are working with the department to evaluate those, what we hope are shorter term impacts on the department. And we will continue to work with the department to supplement the staffing levels, the budget in those in that department if we need to. So again, no permanent change, but we have been in the current year, and if we need to in FY23, supplementing that if this COVID and hospital situation are causing temporary budget needs for the departments. So I think that's it. Just a quick look, and again, more in your municipal budget book. So any questions on the municipal budget, or? I see a few hands up, or?
Yeah. Hey, Pam, this is Alex. I just have a question on that last slide you presented. With respect to the longer routes being run by the ambulance service, are the receivables going up in, like, are we being paid by the mile or by the distance? Or are we seeing an increase in receivables for that extra distance traveled?
Let me find that out for you, Alex. Yep. Started to answer. I don't want to misanswer that. So let me check for that and I can get back to you.
Thank you.
Chris, You want to go, Chris?
I might make a comment about that. At a prior meeting, we were told by the fire chief that the ambulance charges about $1,500 per trip. And it's it more than covers the cost of the ambulance, as I understand it.
Yeah, Pam, last year when I talked to the fire chief about this issue, it wasn't the extra distance that was the problem. It was the extra time that
Yes.
his people were out of service that was really causing the issue and would really drive the need for additional staff people to cover what the ambulance driver couldn't, because the ambulance driver was with the ambulance in Boston for an hour instead of at Norwood for 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. That's what I meant with the distance, that it's a longer run for them, so they're gone longer before coming back, able to assist on another call.
Yeah, so two things, Pam. First of all, does Chris know who maintains the paved path between East Street and Wilson Way? Is that the town, or is that a contractor paid by the energy company that's down on Wilson Way?
Chris, I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Okay, just curious. And I know that there's a ribbon cutting ceremony for the new library coming up. I was wondering if maybe the selectman or select person Walsh knows the timing of that.
At 4 o'clock on Monday.
Yes.
Okay.
It's just to, Madam Chair, if I may, it's
Pam, are you complete? Are you done with your municipal presentation or no?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, so we do have a hand raised. Christina?
All right, I'm going to be a broken record. But I just want to make sure, Pam, first of all, thanks for this presentation. It was great. I looked over it already. Very impressed with all that you've done. So I just want to make sure that the, multi-family housing zoning is on your radar. I know we've talked about it already, but just because we need to be postured to absorb those additional costs. There is a sidewalk requirement, lighting, police and safety. So we could have a huge capital outlay with respect to that new zoning if we do end up building new multifamily units to the tune of 1,170 units. So just want to make sure that that is kind of something you guys.
Chairman Walsh, do you want to, I know you had a presentation before the select board this last week. Do you want to address any of the concerns of the commission at this time, or how would you like? Would you like to talk?
On what issue? I'm sorry, I was answering a text message from somebody.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
It's okay.
the issue that has come up again, as it did with the school committee meeting presentation, is the new state law requiring every town that has a
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So I know where you're going. So
Okay.
I was fortunate enough, and I guess it's going to help us a little bit in town. I am now the Massachusetts Selectman President for this year. And so I spent my entire day, this is my 9th Zoom call today. But we did have a discussion about this today. And what's interesting is the state is looking at it. Comments are being accepted until the end of March. We, believe it or not, there are some inconsistencies, but what it does is 15 housing units per acre is what they're requiring. Now, we have been designated, where do you get this? We've been designated a bus town, even though we have one bus route, the 34E, and we have 2 train stations, but we've been designated as a bus station. And so there's some inconsistencies within the statute just to start. So we are, and Chris and I were talking about this a few minutes ago even, we are trying to figure out where we can come up with the amount of housing that's required without giving up our commercial property for zoning, so that we can maintain our split tax rate, but also to try to address this issue. We're not alone. There are lots of smaller communities who are struggling with the same thing. And the problem is the statute and the interpretation right now, they just took definitions from other things and stuck it in. So it really hasn't been decided. And MMA is going to be all over this. And as I said, they just started today taking comments, but they're accepting comments at least until the end of March before they come up with better regulations. So we're kind of waiting to see where the dust settles, so to speak, but we don't know, and it's an ongoing issue. Basically, it's a matter of right if you within, I think it's a half mile of train or bus transportation. So it's an automatic right, and it has to be zoned, and that's what they're working on. So the planning board has been very busy, to say the least.
Yes.
And it only requires, the worst part is if you go to town meeting, it only requires a majority vote, no longer a 2/3 on the zoning change. So another big issue.
All right, so we really appreciate how hard the planning board is working on this, and I know it's come before the select board, and we appreciate your work as well, and we know you'll bring it to us when the time is right.
Yes, we will.
George, go ahead.
I know that I asked this before, and maybe I got the answer. I don't think I did. Michael, do you know generally what the dollar amount is of the, again, potentially sacrificed grants that we can lose if we don't go with this program?
I don't know yet. Like I said, the dust hasn't cleared. The questions aren't even answered. You know, even just simple as our definition as a bus route. I don't know. So there are lots of things that haven't been decided, and that is probably farther down the list.
And I guess to follow that up with, we still have the right as a town to vote in favor or not in favor of doing this. Obviously, there's repercussions to not doing it because we would lose something, but we still have that right as a town, don't we?
Well, it's interesting because even the lawyers were discussing whether or not they can force this upon us. And if they can, how long do they have to implement it? Does it have to be implemented right away? Or is there a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan? All that stuff still has to be decided, George, and it hasn't yet, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So it's all, everything's up in the air with the lawyers. I think we're in great shape.
Hey, George. You're insulting half the commission.
Equal up to NCPAs, they're bad too. I'll jump myself in there.
All right, well, Chairman Walsh, we appreciate your comments on this, and we'll stay on top of it, and it'll come back to us when it does. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
Madam Chair?
Mr.
Yes.
Coleman has a comment, yes.
Oh, yes.
If I can just get back to Chris's question. Did get a response, Chris. That property is a commercial property maintained by the owner of 80 Wilson Way. And Madam Chair, just a formal announcement, we will be having a ribbon cutting at Wentworth Hall. Wentworth Hall houses our youth and family services as well as the Islington branch of the library. It also is the space that we're using for some of our recreation programs as well. That will be Monday, February 14th. Yes, it's Valentine's Day at 4 p.m. We will be having a formal dedication for that building in the spring. So just want to let you know, this will be the ribbon cutting, and then we'll have the formal dedication when the weather gets a little nicer.
Thank you.
Thanks for that answer, Chris.
I'm sorry I had to step away for a second there, but Pam, did you have a chance to answer the municipal questions that were submitted to you in writing?
I think the municipal questions really relate to the overall budget. There were some questions on
pages 12 and 13, 2.4.
Yeah, I think that was really like free cash and that type of discussion, right?
No, the free cash questions are below that, Pam. The question is, I honestly can't read the question because I don't know what all the letters, they're simply letters here that all they stand for, but Pam, if you didn't see these, we'll resend them to you and you can get us the answers. Not to worry about.
I did see the questions. I think that question related to using free cash.
Hey,
for
Pam,
capital
I
versus
submitted some of
operating
those.
budget.
Yeah, I guess submitted some of those. I think you can address them in a broad budget. Some of them use examples from municipal, but I think the concept.
I think it is the broad budget. Yes, thank you. So we'll talk
sorry
about that.
Thank you guys very much. Okay, if we have no more questions for Pam on this part of the budget, can we move on? Pam, go ahead.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, so can everyone see that? Well, we'll move into the overall budget and I'll move really quickly from here. I first just want to mention that we do produce an overall budget summary book, and we did send that out to everyone. We sent out a PDF and we did mail out hard copies. 2 sections in that budget. The front section, we are giving you the sheets on specifically what is being proposed right now for the 23 budget, operating budget, capital articles, and the revenue used to support that. The second section has a lot of information on all areas of the town finances. Our tax levy, state aid, our debt, our meals and hotel tax, free cash, stabilization, Opeb pension, a lot of that information. Just want to point out one thing. One of the final couple of sheets in that book is our status report on our financial policies. And we did see today that there was a little disruption when we went to PDF that book and print it out to those pages. There was some blanks in some of that material. So we did just resend out through Jane today an update of those pages. So we'd ask that you just replace that update. None of the data changed, but there was just some blanks that appeared, some of that information. And again, that's a report that shows the status of where we are against our financial policies. It's not the detail on the financial policies. We do have that online, or we're happy to send those out to you, our written financial policies, if you'd like to look at that. But that book does contain all that material. And we really try to stress, I know a lot of our longer term members know that we show this scale on many occasions. The budget that the select board puts out, the overall budget, really has to address a lot of areas. The operating budget, making sure we're delivering those services in our school and municipal departments, but we need to maintain our capital assets. We need to address that we have appropriate reserve accounts. We need to address our long-term liabilities. We need to balance the tax bill impact because we are primarily funded by our tax revenue. It's a very difficult balance to do, but we're trying to make sure that we have an appropriate overall budget that addresses all of those needs. So just moving through this quickly, the budget currently where we're at is able to continue to providing high quality services through the town and school operations. So you've just heard the overview of both of those budget. Current school budget increase of 3.5%, municipal budget 3.7%. We are continuing to invest in our capital budget. As you know, that's been a concerted effort by the select board and the Finance and Warrant Commission over the last several years. So we are funding again our base capital budget at the level that we've done the last several years. We also, again, as we've done for the last few years, we have a supplemental capital budget article. And we'll show you the items there, but that's to get at some additional capital beyond our base. And this year we're funding that with use of the meal and hotel tax fund. Some years we use free cash for that article. Also addressing our liabilities and reserves. 2 particular articles we're funding: our annual contribution to our stabilization fund that allows us to stay on track with our financial policies, and then our continued Opeb appropriation. And for FY23, that is now at $1.5 million, keeps us on track with that required funding. There are a couple of items in the capital budget right now that are being considered by the select board that would require borrowing if they're to go forward. And I think these are what Selectman Walsh referred to earlier. These are still being considered by the select board. They're going to be continuing to talk about these items in an upcoming meeting. But right now, these items would require borrowing as part of the capital budget project. Gay Street sidewalk, 5.5 million. Conant Road culvert design, 200,000. Cemetery expansion design, 125,000 to prepare for the next phase of our cemetery. Canton Street sidewalk design, 900,000. The town is eligible, and we think very much in line to get a state grant, a quite large state grant for Canton Street sidewalk. We need to design that project to be ready to be eligible for that grant. And then finally, we do have an article to expand what the town's been able to do for senior tax relief in our Aid to the Elderly Fund, currently showing this at $300,000. We fund that with free cash. So comprehensive list of all the areas that we're getting to in the budget. Just moving quickly on what is the total funding, looking at some numbers. Total budget for FY '23, $112 million, a $3.8 million increase or 3.6% increase over the current year. The bulk of our spending out of that total spending is on our school and municipal operating budgets. 67% of our budget, as shown in blue, is for the school and municipal departments' one-year operation for what we provide to the community. Looking further at the operating budget. So total proposed operating budget, what we vote as and refer to as Appendix D at town meeting, $105 million budget, $3.8 million increase over the current year, 3.8%. The pie chart shows the various components of that overall budget. So again, it does provide for stable and sustainable growth for the operating budgets for municipal and school departments. I do want to point out that right now, and we'll look at the detail, the fixed cost component of this operating budget, $20 million, a $1.2 million or 6% increase over the current year, is higher than typical. In the current year, this increase was 5%. We have an estimate in here for our health insurance costs in FY '23. We're hoping that as we move forward over the next month or so in the budget process, we might see this number come down. So again, the operating budget, $3.8 million increase. Largest dollar amount of that distribution is to our school department, as that's the largest area of our spending. $1.7 million being allocated to the school budget. $1.2 million, as I mentioned, to fixed cost, hoping to see that come down, and then $816,000 to the municipal budget. This next slide, and I want to mention, I should have mentioned in the beginning, all of these are just slides from the summary budget book. So everything you're seeing here is in that summary budget book that you have, and that is online. So we're just kind of highlighting some of the areas. This slide shows, again, the distribution of that overall operating budget, $105 million, shows the categories of spending with the school in blue, municipal in red, our fixed costs in the yellow, and our debt service in the green. And we've mentioned all the time when we look at this and at town meeting, this is a standard distribution for a suburban community in Massachusetts with a high performing school district. You would typically see the school budget being the largest portion of the operating budget by this degree, almost 2-to-1 versus our other areas. We then have here the table showing the growth that's occurred for the last several years in our school and municipal departments. And again, we've indicated that overall, this 3.8% increase in the operating budget is a bit higher than typical. It's 3.1% in the current year, and that is because of the increase in the fixed cost budget. Again, we'll be monitoring and updating that over the next month. So looking for a minute at that fixed cost budget. In our current year, our total fixed costs, shared accounts, reserve accounts total just over $19 million. The bulk of that, $15.4 million, is in our school and municipal employee benefits costs. So that is all our costs, staff related. That includes health insurance, pension costs, unemployment costs, workers' comp, various payroll taxes, all of that. And again, this is in one budget. It's not within the municipal or in the school. It's in this shared component. So $15.4 million in that category. We then have $1.2 million in other costs that are town school shared costs, including our comprehensive insurance, which is our insurance for our buildings, our audit costs, other things like that in that component. We also show here our trash budget, $1.6 million, and then various reserve accounts, $725,000. So in the current year, $19 million in this total category. Of this $15 million in employee benefit costs, we're just showing the breakdown here. 56% of that relates to the school employees, 44% to municipal. Obviously, out of our total employees, the school has a much greater number of employees than municipal departments. So they have, more of the employee benefit costs related to that. We have pointed out in the past that one thing that skews this a little bit is that the teacher's pension cost is not a cost paid by Westwood or local government. So we pay for in our budget for all non-school employees to be part of the Norfolk County pension. And we'll show you that assessment, but we pay for that pension assessment for all non-school employees out of our budget. The teachers assessment, all of the teachers in Massachusetts are part of the Massachusetts teachers pension system. That is actually borne by the state. And we're very fortunate that that's how it works, because our apportioned assessment in the current year for that is $14 million. So you do not see that in this total budget here. The state handles that cost. We do have to show that on our year-end financial statements, but we do not actually pay for that, and that's a huge help. So just a little bit of a look at the increase. As I said, the total fixed cost budget right now, increase of $1.2 million or 6.7%, higher right now than it is in the current year, which was a 5.3% increase. One component of that, as I mentioned, is the pension assessment for Norfolk County. That is a 7.3% increase or $444,000 increase for FY23. We know that that is our actual assessment. That is not an estimate. We have already received that assessment from Norfolk County. So we know that this number is a set number. The next item is our health insurance budget. This again is an estimate only. We are currently estimating a 7% increase in our overall health insurance, and that would be a cost of $475,000. We purchase our health insurance through the State Group Insurance Commission, or GIC. They are currently in the process of reviewing and finalizing information for FY23. At a meeting in February, they will finalize the various health insurance plans. And then at a meeting in early March, they will finalize the rates. So after that meeting in March, we're always able to go back into our budget and update as necessary for what those final rates are. So again, before your final hearing at the end of March, we will have an update to the health insurance budget, and hopefully we'll be able to take this down a little bit. Just a couple of other items on those different budgets we were looking at. The trash budget, a smaller increase than we've seen in other years, 2% increase or $36,000. Some of our other various costs, comprehensive insurance, Medicare taxes, payroll taxes, about a 5% increase or $150,000. And then our Opeb appropriation. We have been on a schedule for the last several years where we're increasing that appropriation by $25,000 each year per a funding schedule that we're working off of. So a $25,000 increase to that. A couple of other items this year for FY23 in the shared cost category. We are adding to our energy and sustainability efforts. So about a $51,000 increase to that category. This again is for town and school. Not just on the town side, this is for everyone. As I know the FinCom is well aware, the town has had in place for a number of years an energy manager. Tom Philbin has been in that role, working and helping town and school departments to bring lots of energy efficiency projects to our buildings. We are looking to add to that in FY23 on the sustainability side and add a similar type role on sustainability to work with departments and our building maintenance in those areas, particularly making sure at our new facilities we're doing everything we can in that area. Also some additional cost in various hardware, software, maintenance costs, and some communication efforts that we're continuing to try to enhance town and school-wide, additional dollars there. So for those two categories, some additional efforts being put forth in FY23, about $137,000 increase. And then finally, one final item in this area, $35,000 for funding for the charter review. So the town is required to update our charter every 10 years. We're a little bit past that. We were due for that, I think, a year or so ago, and that got held off a little bit with the pandemic. But the select board has been moving forward with that. They will be reallocating the Charter Review Committee. They will start to do their work going forward. That is about a year-long process typically to go through the charter and gather changes that might be necessary and put that forth to the community. Sometimes there's a need to hire outside legal counsel to help with that or other type of research that might be necessary. So we have included some funding for that process to occur in FY23. So that's the fixed cost area. Just looking quickly at a couple of other items. So as I mentioned, $125,000, our annual appropriation to our stabilization fund. That's our main reserve account. Very important to protect the town in case of emergencies, very important for our credit rating. This chart shows our balance in the stabilization fund over a long-term period. In FY23, we would have about $3.8 million in that account, pretty close to where our financial policy target requires us to be. We were able to, about 10 years ago, through a couple of one-time revenue uses, build that account up to a healthy balance. And then we've just consistently every year since then been adding a small amount, relatively small amount in this general level, $125,000 a year. We've been very fortunate that during COVID, we did not need to drain or take any money from the stabilization fund. So this is in really good shape. Again, this is very important to help protect the town, help us through any kind of budget disruptions, and also important for our credit rating. Just looking quickly at the Opeb appropriation. This chart shows you the annual appropriation into that Opeb liability trust account in an effort to work towards that unfunded liability. So a number of years ago, about 10 years ago, the town really made some efforts to get moving on the Opeb issue in FY13 and then again in FY16. We were able, through some changes in our healthcare plans and our healthcare budget, build up our annual appropriation. We have now, since that point, committed to an additional $25,000 a year increase. That brings us to the proposal shown in green for FY23 of $1.5 million. Again, very close to target on where we need to be. The town has done an excellent job with this, and some of the long-term FinCom members will remember the early days here and how it was hard to get started, but the town started slowly and now is able to build in a very healthy annual appropriation, and we are very much in good shape on this Opeb issue. We currently have $17 million in our trust account. And there's more information on Opeb in that overall summary book that goes through those early years and how this all works. But we've come a long way and are really in good shape on Opeb. Just quickly on the appropriation for the aid to the elderly, we are recommending a $300,000 appropriation of free cash. We've gone through this slide before, but there's many programs in town that help the seniors. We have many seniors participating in a lot of these various tax relief programs. We offer various exemptions offered by the state. We have a tax deferral program, which allows seniors to defer payment of their annual real estate taxes until they sell their home. We have a senior work off in place that allows seniors to work in various town and school departments, that allows them to work and have $1,500 taken off of their annual tax bill. And then we have our Aid to the Elderly program, which we've had in place for well over 20 years. It's the most generous program in the state, and is really the program Westwood has used to get funding out to needy seniors in town and help them with their real estate tax bill. So other communities do other programs. This has been a program that Westwood has really adopted and continued to expand over many years. And again, in your summary book, there are several pages that describe this program and how it works. But currently we're able to distribute about $100,000 a year to about 55 senior residents in town. The distribution they get pays about 25% of their tax bill. And so we're looking in the budget proposal to add what we're currently using to fund that program, both to expand the number of seniors we can reach, and the amount that we're able to distribute to them. Particularly as we go forth over the next couple of years with the tax impact of the new school program, we would be able to mitigate that impact for these residents through distribution in the aid to the elderly. I do think you might have seen in Governor Baker's budget proposal, he talked about expanding the state's effort with senior tax relief. It is a statewide problem, not limited to Westwood, that how the state of Massachusetts values and tax property, that you often have senior residents in suburban communities where values are accelerating around them, seeing significant increases to their tax bill. So again, it's a statewide effort that really should be dealt with on the state level. They're making some effort in that area. Is Selectman Walsh still here? Yes, I think he has some updated information on that.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, today's meeting, we had time with Secretary Heffernan, who said that the governor is putting forth in his budget a proposal to almost double the cap for the senior citizens, or raise on the circuit breaker, that it's going from about 1,100 to about 2,360, I think, is according to the governor's budget. So that is a statewide proposal that the governor has put forward to help the senior citizens with their tax bill. So that is put forth by the governor and will, of course, voted on later this year.
And we would keep you updated on that, but I think that's certainly a recognition that this is a statewide problem, and that's where the effort really needs to come to make meaningful change for our seniors. Just moving on, the capital budget, the select board has continued to make sure we're doing appropriate reinvestment in the town's assets and infrastructure. This FY23 budget continues to do that. It's very important for us to maintain our town and school buildings and our various infrastructure, our parks and roadways. It's very important that we make sure our departments have appropriate and safe capital equipment. That is particularly important for our public safety and public works departments who really perform their services to the communities, highly reliant on their various equipment. So the effort continues to make sure we're appropriately investing in capital, both the base capital and efforts to fund beyond that. So again, you'll see in the capital budget that we have similar amounts to current years for the base capital, school capital just over $1 million, municipal capital 1.3 million, both of those funded with free cash, and we'll show you those on the next couple of slides. Sewer capital 700,000 funded with sewer retained earnings, and then the additional capital this year 682,000 funded with the meal and hotel tax revenue and ambulance revenue. Again, as I mentioned, that there are some articles, that would require borrowing. Those are still being evaluated by the select board, and we'll have the updates on those as we move forward before your public hearings in March. This chart just shows you what we've done with the base capital for the last several years. Again, proposing for FY23 in green, $2.3 million for town and school capital. That's the same level now that we've done for the last few years. As was pointed out during the school presentation a number of years ago, 10 years ago, we were at half that level, no, a third of that level, able to increase it as University Station came online, and now really are at a much more appropriate level of sustainable capital. So the select board has committed to making sure that we're maintaining this level of spending on capital, to make sure we're maintaining our buildings, and again, rotating and having appropriate and safe equipment for our large departments. But because there were these many years where we were not at our appropriate level, we have done since FY17 this additional capital article each year. So this bar graph shows you what the amount spent each year on additional capital since FY17 has been. And again, this article has been an effort to kind of make up for those years where we were not able to meet the appropriate levels of spending, and also to get at some large items that don't easily fit into that annual appropriation. So in the current year, we had our last May town meeting, that extra article was just over $1 million. with 750,000 of that being the replacement of the turf field at the high school, the multipurpose field in the back, and also some pool repairs of 300,000. So without this additional article, that would have consumed the entire list of municipal capital, not something that we could do. Prior year projects included large school IT network, court lighting for the tennis court at the high school, larger HVAC projects at the Thurston and Senior Center. So this has been very helpful article over the last several years to get at some of those larger projects, and to fund these, we are using the free cash or the meal and hotel tax. Just the next couple of slides show you the particular list of capital projects within each article. So this is the municipal list, $1.3 million total, funded with free cash, similar level and list to what it is each year. This is essentially our ongoing rotation and replacement of equipment and our ongoing maintenance of our buildings. The arrows highlight just a couple of different projects. First, the Downey Street sidewalk design, $75,000. The state has already, we have already received a state grant to fund that work, $365,000. But we do need to design the project in order to go out and actually do the work. So as part of that grant, we need to design this. So we've added this to our capital list. Another item here is a little bit different, $30,000 for the library for a bookmobile. And this is something different. This is to take one of the Council on Aging's vans that's coming out of rotation, to retrofit that and make it a mini little bookmobile that the library staff would be able to take around to various community events, such as Westwood Day or things like that. Part of this effort comes from some of what they were doing during COVID, where they had to do more where people weren't in the building, and they tried to do more outreach to get material out to the community. So $30,000 for that project. And then finally, this item here, the Housing Authority Building Maintenance and Improvement, $150,000. So this is something that FinCom has seen before. This is year 5 of a 5-year effort to do some major enhancements and improvements to the original affordable housing stock. Most of that stock was given to the town in the way of gifted buildings. They were really not in good shape when the town received those buildings. The town and housing authority have been working on this 5-year plan to do appropriate upgrades to each of those facilities. The level that was required was beyond the ability of the housing authority to do within some of their ongoing rental and revenue income. So again, this would complete that 5-year plan of major upgrades. So that's the municipal list, 1.3 million. This is the school list, just over $1 million, and the schools went through that list through with you. The school article, 3 projects, $700,000, again funded through the sewer revenue. Major item here is $500,000, the pump station facility maintenance. The sewer has an outline identified ongoing maintenance program to make sure that the pump stations are up to date and always in well-working condition. And then finally, this is the additional capital article that I mentioned for this year, $682,000. Includes the items listed here, $60,000 for the school street playground to repurpose some and replace some equipment, $215,000 for fire department to do a full replacement of our self-contained breathing apparatus. That's the equipment that the fire staff puts on when entering a building because of some changes in requirements and regulations for that equipment. We would like to replace the whole, all of that system for all of the staff at once, $215,000. Also $75,000 for the library parking lot, some work that needs to be done there. $300,000 for a school project, a network upgrade, a major item that they need to do. And then a small item here, $32,000 for some other fire equipment, rescue equipment, $32,000. This is an annual item that you've seen before. We're combining it in this item because it was the only item in kind of the ambulance article, and we've just tucked it in here for this year. So $682,000, with $650,000 of that being funded with the meal and hotel tax revenue, $32,000 with ambulance receipt. And finally, I won't mention this more, but these are the articles that would be required as borrowing articles. Select Board still looking at those. As we move forward in your process, if these move forward, you would start to get the language that's required for any of the borrowing articles. And I'll just point out the one item with the cemetery expansion design, $125,000. That is funded through cemetery lot sales. So anytime we have work on the cemetery, that is funded through cemetery funds. So that is all the expense items, and I'll just move quickly here on the revenue side of that. This shows you the list and the pie chart breakdown of the total revenue needed to fund those budgets. $112 million in revenue, 3.6% over the current year. This chart shows you the various components of this category that makes up our revenue. We've looked at this before, obviously, as shown in blue. Our tax revenue is 80% of our total budget. It's our main source of revenue. That is very standard for a suburban community in Massachusetts. We have state aid is about 6% of our budget. We're currently using a $6.9 million estimate of that revenue for FY23. Just looking at the slide for the tax levy calculation. We've gone through this with FinCom before, but as we've talked about, our main source of revenue, Proposition 2.5, dictates how much the town can raise in taxes. Prop 2.5 limits the total amount the town can collect. It doesn't dictate what we actually do assess. That's determined by town meeting, what we actually vote to use. Prop 2.5 does not dictate how much each individual tax bill goes up. It simply says what is the upper limit for what you can raise in taxes. And it's a pure formula-driven calculation. And this slide shows you for FY23 what that calculation is. It starts with an amount from the year before, your levy limit. That would be 86.7 million for FY23. We're allowed to increase that by 2.5%. $2.1 million. We then put in an estimate of new tax growth. So new taxes that you might have coming online in FY23 from new development, new home renovations, that type of thing. We show that in two lines, one for University Station and one for all other. We're not required to do that. There's no difference between the two. We're just separating them here so that we can track the revenue coming from University Station. We've mentioned several times, this is an estimate only in the budget. New growth taxes will not be known or certified. They are certified, these numbers, by the state each year. That will not occur until the fall, the October, November timeframe of 2022. This is simply an estimate at this point. So that's how the formula works. If we had a general override, that would go here. You come to what they call your levy limit for FY23 on a budget basis, $89.4 million. You then add in this line for exempt debt. That is the exact principal and interest for projects that are voted outside Prop 2.5. Our exempt debt for FY23, $951,000. That's for the high school and library projects only. No exempt debt is online yet for the new Hanlon Deerfield School, and that will not come online until FY24. This exempt debt, as we talked about, is lower than previous years because we were able to refinance the library bond last spring, saving over $750,000 in savings and the annual amount coming down. So with this limit and then exempt debt, the total levy we could tax is $90.3 million. And that really, in a nutshell, is Prop 2.5. It's the upper limit of what a town could tax. This is overseen by Department of Revenue. Clearly, right now, we're in a budget phase. Numbers in here are estimates, but this is simply what we need to do and show you to show what would be the most that the town could consider in the budget the most you could tax. The line here is what's actually assessed each year. And then the difference between those two numbers is just called unused tax levy. So we've had many questions on how that changes. And I think I've explained that several times about how these numbers are estimate. We're showing you here, this is 90.1 million is what we are proposing in the budget to fund all of the items that we just went through on the expense side. At this point, that would give us unused levy of about $200,000. Each year in the fall, as these numbers are finalized, you will see a change in that excess levy to what it actually is. So in FY22, our current year, the town could have taxed $87.7 million. That's what town meeting could have spent in taxes. Town meeting appropriated $86.5 million. So there was excess levy of $1.1 million. So we show you this each year, but this is on a budget basis, what we're working on. So every year the town has excess levy. We have not taxed to the maximum capacity for many years. We've not had a general override since 2007. Westwood Station has really been the driving force in allowing us to have this excess levy. Otherwise, in those years pre-Westwood Station, we were taxing to the maximum capacity each year to fund the budget that people desired. Looking next at state aid, just quickly, as I mentioned, $6.9 million shown in green. We are using Governor Baker's budget that he came out with a couple of weeks ago. You can see that we've had for several years just very steady increases in state aid, nothing dramatic, no general increases each year, but no disruptions mid-year either, even with COVID. Again, state aid is about 6% of our total budget. This chart just shows you at a longer term basis what's been the history of state aid. And going back 20 years or so, we used to have kind of a more wave component to state aid, where we would have increases, but then disruptions if the state ran into budget problems. And in recent years, we've just had very kind of minor increases each year, but no disruptions either, again, also through COVID. Just a couple more revenue sources. This looks at free cash. Free cash is essentially the retained earnings balance each year as we end a budget. It's a number that needs to be certified by Department of Revenue. We had certified this year $7.2 million. This chart shows you in blue the amount certified each year for the last several years. It's a new amount every year. This balance doesn't add or accumulate year to year. It's a new set amount each year. The bar in blue shows you what's certified each year. Green shows you what we have spent. So one of our financial policies deals with free cash. Financial policy says that we should have $3.5 million in unused free cash each year. So when we get a certification, that doesn't mean all of that money should be used and spent at town meeting. Our policies say about 3.5 million should be there available for emergency use for the town to deal with any unanticipated budget issues. Our free cash policy also says that we should never use free cash towards our operating budget. We only want to fund our operating budget needs with ongoing annual revenue. So free cash and meal and hotel tax are not kind of ongoing revenue. It can fluctuate year to year. So we do not, by policy, apply these to operating needs. And I'm going through this in a little detail because this is some of the questions that we received. We purposely use our available free cash, what's there above what should be unallocated, and apply it to our capital budget. So as I showed you, those annual capital budget articles fully funded with free cash. We would also use those free cash for any kind of one-time other needs. Sometimes we have to supplement our snow and ice budget, which we most likely will be doing this year. So in our current budget, we use $2.6 million of free cash, with 2.3 of that going for our school and municipal capital, And in total, that was about $1 million less than FY21, because in FY21, that extra capital article was funded with free cash. In FY22, it was funded with hotel and meal tax revenue. We every year fund that stabilization article with free cash. And then in our current year, so at our May town meeting, we had $181,000 in kind of miscellaneous articles that used free cash, particularly $150,000 snow and ice, $31,000 for a small street accepted article that we had. And what we're proposing in the 23 budget at this point, shown on the bottom, $2.3 billion, same as before for our school and municipal capital, $125,000 for stabilization, and then $300,000 for that extra appropriation into the aid to the elderly fund. So again, we always use free cash only for capital or other articles. Again, by your final public hearings in March, when we look at the budget supplement articles, you may see us using more of free cash. Again, particularly if we need to supplement any budgets or if we need to supplement for snow and ice. Next couple of slides just look at the meal and hotel tax. And again, a lot of information in the overall budget book on this. But this was revenue that the town adopted in 2015. So when you pay sales tax, state sales tax, for at meal or hotel, there's an additional local option that the state collects and sends out to communities. The bar graphs show here on the left for meals and on the right hotel, the annual amount that we've taken in each year under those categories. So our annual meal tax revenue in green, halfway through the current year, we're at $231,000. So we received this quarterly from the state. And we're at $137,000 in the hotel revenue. So you can see that we were seeing, when it came on board, we were seeing a steady increase in meals tax through FY19, up to almost $450,000. We absolutely saw a disruption to this revenue during COVID. We saw this number coming down. It seems in FY22 that we are back on track, going back to this level pre-COVID. And you see a similar issue with the hotel tax, an increase, a disruption during COVID, and now it looks like coming back maybe to those pre-COVID levels. What's really, really important about this revenue is that when Westwood adopted this local option, our town meeting, right at time of adoption, set up a separate fund that this revenue would go into. This does not flow into the general fund. Town meeting said we're going to put this money into a separate account, and then to utilize this revenue requires a town meeting vote. This chart at the bottom here shows you the quarterly distribution for the meals and hotel. And again, you can see our most recent quarter in December. We're coming back. We're advancing beyond what was there during the pandemic. But this slide shows you what we have used the meal and hotel tax for, very specifically to fund that extra capital each year, as I mentioned in the current year, the turf field and the pool. This shows you the balance in the meal account each year. We put the fund into this. It requires town meeting vote to utilize the money. This was really something that was very different and very helpful for us versus other communities during COVID. Other communities were using this money to fund their ongoing operating budget. And when this went down, the annual revenue, they had major disruptions to their budget. So as a policy, and again, by town meeting vote, this money is not used for operating budgets. We would never want to use this to fund police and fire and teacher staffing levels, because then when you see the funds drop, you have a disruption to your staffing. This graph here shows you the balance in the account at the end of each fiscal year, June 30th in the account. We ended June 30th, 2021, $1.2 million in that account. With what we've received to date, we have $1.5 billion in that account. We're proposing to use at the upcoming town meeting, we looked at that article, $650,000, leaving funds for future years and future capital needs. So finally, just wrapping up, as we've talked about with a couple of items, the select board, as supported by the FinCom and town meeting, very purposely builds structurally sound budgets, which allow us to live through rainy days, allow us to keep those steady increases and steady budgets for our school and municipal departments. There's nothing worse for a community than to be laying off teachers, police, and fire. It's not what the community wants. So our budgets are built to have structurally sound budgets. There's no one-time subsidies. We do not inflate our revenue expectations just to build up budgets. We're very conservative. As I mentioned, the meal and hotel tax specifically does not fund ongoing budgets. We put that into a separate account. Town meeting and has very purposely built our reserve accounts over the last several years to target levels and has put us in a very good spot to maintain our services through any rainy day disruption. And again, we saw that during COVID. We had a lot of changes to our service delivery during COVID, particularly our school department, lots of additional costs incurred by the schools and our public safety departments to deliver services. Our 21 and 22 budgets have weathered that disruption quite well. As I mentioned, no cuts to state aid. We've not had to use our reserve accounts. We were very fortunate to receive a lot of outside COVID funding, federal and state, that's allowed us to cover any costs that we've had, not have to go into our reserve accounts to pay for those things. The FY23 budgets, you heard a little bit of a mention in both the school and municipal budgets. There are some costs that may be ongoing as the pandemic continues. We've tried not to build those into the ongoing budgets. We're trying to work with departments to continue to fund those with one-time revenue if they still have any cost. And finally, the next step, we continue with the budget. This is the budget, a balanced, well-rounded overview budget at this point in the process. We continue with the process over the next 2 months until your final hearings at the end of March. We'll continue to follow the revenue of the state budget. We'll continue to look at the various assessments we receive, again, particularly that health insurance and what that might do. The select board continues to look at the capital budget and we'll update on any items there. And then we also, as I mentioned, will prepare like those first 2 warrant articles, which are the supplements to the current budget year. We'll work on that over the next couple of weeks. We will bring you any updates in mid-March on any changes to the budget that you've just seen. So you're going to go out now and review these budgets, meet with the departments. Before your final hearing at the end of March, we'll be back with any updates, both on the revenue side or the expense side, as well as any of these supplements that we need to do and how we might fund that. So we make sure when you reach mid-March that we'll be very careful in explaining anything that's changed from the material that you're reviewing today. And that is our overview budget. I think as I went through that I answered a lot of the questions that came in on the free cash, meals tax, how we're using that, how we apply that in the budget.
Yeah, Pam, thank you so much. I was tracking the questions and I think you did, but there might be a couple of follow-ups. Do you want to get us back to full screen so we can see everybody? Here we go. Okay, does anyone want to raise their hand and ask Pam or the select board, any select chairman, any other questions? Dr. Iddick.
A couple of questions. All right, I hope you're able to hear me. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. All right, my first question concerns the table that you showed on page 20. I would like to show my own version, if I may. By sharing the screen, if it's possible. Okay, please tell me if you can see the screen that I'm trying to show.
No.
No, right. And great, how about now? Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Yes, good. All right, this unused tax levy issue has been confusing. And one of the questions that I asked was that another line be added. In fact, another member of the commission made a related comment about the unused tax levy being the lowest in many years. But Actually, the unused tax levy is very different from the other numbers shown on this line. The budgeted, and by the way, I'm pleased that the budgeted unused tax levy is not zero this year, as it has been in some years. However, the budgeted 200,000 unused tax levy is essentially zero plus rounding noise on a budget of over 112 million. The other numbers on that line are not at all comparable, as they are the much larger revised or final amounts calculated later after adding in additional receipts from new construction, and that's referred to as the excess levy. The budgeted unused tax levy is usually either zero, as in fiscal 20, or very small remainder. And those are the only numbers that should be on that line, in my view. Putting the larger revised numbers on the same line obscures the reality that the budget is essentially formed from the maximum tax levy that is legally permitted without an override. And I showed here the unused tax levy numbers from prior years, which I requested be shown here, but it has not been. I hope that is understandable, but this line shows the budgeted unused tax levy. The numbers here on the same line are very different in character. So we have a system in which the budget is basically the maximum tax levy that is legally permitted without an override. I don't know if you would like to say something about that, Pam, but I do have another question as well.
So
I'm just going to say one quick statement because I've answered this multiple times. The budget is not set on using every available dollar from the tax levy. These are estimates here, and we're well aware that these are conservative estimates at the lower end of what we expect. When these numbers come in higher, this is not a great surprise. This is a conservative presentation to the community. I could easily make these estimates huge numbers and give everyone great hope that there's all kinds of money they could spend in the budget. That would be disaster for the community. So if we overinflate these numbers and we build a budget and take a budget to town meeting that adds all kinds of revenue to the school budget, say, and the school budget hires new teachers, and then in the fall, when we have our actuals certified, we don't make that estimate, we would have to hold an emergency fall town meeting, reduce our budgets, and lay off teachers. So there is no, I don't know what the implication is that somehow we're trying to max every dollar. We're not. This is a conservative effort. The only reason you would want these numbers higher is to spend more and tax more. And that's not our effort. We're being conservative to the community. We do not want to have people build budgets beyond what's the most conservative end of what we know we can afford. But I have explained this to the best of my ability many times. I will point out that the Department of Revenue, the Division of Local Service, has a whole section on their website with small tutorials on all kinds of areas of municipal finance. They have an excellent tutorial on Prop 2.5, this formula, explaining each of the pieces. And I would encourage anyone who wants to understand that more to take a look at those. They're very well done. They're very easy to access on DOR's website.
Thank you, Pam. As you point out, you've addressed this question many times.
Yes,
and
thank
so
you.
let's
I do have
move
another
on.
question.
You have another question that you haven't asked in the past, Peter?
Yes, there's another question. But I did ask that this be on a separate line because these numbers are.
Yes, we appreciate that. You've asked that several times and Pam has
My
addressed your request.
My other question concerns the another chart that we discussed previously. This is the property tax comparisons updated from the last time that we discussed this, showing that Westwood is has a much higher property tax rate than some other communities. And at the last time we discussed this, Pam, you mentioned that this was because some of these communities, particularly Wellesley, are able to rely more heavily on property taxes from business. And I was actually able to obtain some information about that from the Department of Revenue. This is the property tax revenue sources for these communities, showing that Wellesley and Needham actually rely more heavily on residential property taxes than Westwood, and less on commercial and industrial property.
I did not say that they rely more on commercial. That was not what I said. I said just purely looking at tax rate is not a good comparison. You need to look at the tax bill, because people's tax bill is the rate times the value. And the values in Wellesley and Needham are quite different than in Westwood. So a more appropriate measure is what is the average tax bill in each of those communities. We give you information on that in the overall budget book. We give you our ranking in the state of where we are with the average tax bill. And you can go on and look up anyone's tax bill, any community, on the Department of Revenue website. So I did not address that they have more or less commercial. I said purely looking at the rate does not give you the comparison on a resident's tax bill. So we are, I believe, it's in our summary book, I think we're the 18th highest tax bill in the state. And that's where we've been for the last several years. We fluctuate up or down 1 or 2.
All right, Pam, thank you again.
Thank you.
Again, you've addressed this in the past and we appreciate it. So let's move on. Peter, if you could take your slide down so I can see who else has questions. Thank you. Tom Kilgariff, I believe your hand has been up. Do you have a question? Would you unmute Tom, please, Jane?
I think I'm unmuted. Thank you. Pam, quick question on the aid to the elderly fund. You mentioned it was the town's that was the most generous program in the state. How so? Just so I understand that a little bit better.
Well, in the total amount that we're distributing and how many residents we help. So that was a program the state offered as a local option for communities back in 1999. Westwood took it right away and every year has tried to increase that effort. And one of the major steps we took was, I believe in 2016, getting home rule petition approved by the state to allow the town to add to that fund. That a fund originally started as only contributions. And so we are the only community that currently has that, where we can appropriate town dollars into that account. When we at different points that looked at what we're doing with the aid to the elderly and looked to other communities, a couple of our very wealthy communities surrounding us, if you ask them about their aid to the elderly, they have maybe each year 4 or 5 residents they're helping. So it's to a huge extent that we are doing much more for our residents through that program.
Great. So is that is that on a scale of the number of residents receiving assistance, or is it the dollars of assistance per receiving resident?
It's both. When we looked at other, I'm not going to name names, but other neighboring wealthy communities who you'd think would be looking to do a lot, you know, they would have, well, we helped 3 people last year and we gave out $1,500. And, you know, we're doing $100,000 a year for, 55 people. And what's important with that account is that the state allows you to have your own guidelines. There's no hard and fast rules, which gives a community an opportunity to mold that to what it needs. And our Aid to the Elderly Committee has done that. We're able to look at, you know, what's the general asset level of what we want to use as far as looking at applicants and that type of thing. So it gives a town a lot of flexibility in who and how many people that they can help.
Great. Thanks very much. And those slides, I think, were very helpful, that sort of itemize all the many different things and programs the town is doing in that area. So thanks very much, Pam.
Thanks, Tom. Alex, I can't see. I think you have your hand
Yeah,
up.
I have for some reason a more lightly colored hand than most. So
Yeah, you really do.
I see that blends into my beautiful hotel room background. So first of all, Pam, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for, I had sent over a few questions ahead of time, and you covered most of them, especially the ones that were more detailed in nature. A couple other sort of follow-ups, but broader items. So knowing that we have quite a bit in free cash flow, I think the number that I saw was like $7.2 million, right? Is that about right?
Mhm.
And then I think the goal you stated was keeping 3.5 in as like the target goal. And so that remainder is 3.8. If I take out the 2.3 that we have allocated in this budget, so the 2.3 of the capital needs, there's an excess of 1.5 that remains. So if you take what you have to spend there and back that out of the goal. So question with that 1.5, and I think there's an excess in the meal and hotel tax of 900 or so thousand remaining after, what we have in the account, less what you have allocated to spend of that. Can we somehow consider, and I should have put context. This is my first go at this. So if these are silly questions, happy to chat with you offline, but can we somehow take the 1.5 excess from the free cash flow and take some of the excess from the meal and hotel tax to offset the tax levy for the town, for the residents? I think there's just a general nature of like, with the Deerfield Hanlon School coming next year and the debt and sort of that in people's mind, is there any way we can take the excess from those two buckets to help offset the burden on the taxpayers?
Yep. So a couple of things there. And I do appreciate your questions, Alex. I could tell that you looked through all the material, which we appreciate. We could tell that you were a skilled finance person, and that you're just trying to make your way through our municipal world, which is a little bit different.
Yep.
Like free cash in itself, it's a terrible term. People think, well, what does that mean? Obviously it's not cash on hand. It's just really as we close out each budget year. So we have to have a balanced budget each year. As we end our year, obviously we didn't spend everything. Maybe revenue came in a little bit higher. It also involves receivables and such. There's some number that then the state certifies and says, this is what we're going to call free cash. And you can use that going forward only by vote at town meeting. So each year we get a new free cash number. Anything we don't use helps build that next year. So our financial policies say that we should have $3.5 million in free cash. So no matter what we get certified, we don't want to spend it all. You mentioned the 2.3 million in capital, but we're also doing the 125,000 for the transfer to the stabilization. We currently have proposed 300,000 of that to the Aid to the Elderly Fund. And then each year there could be additional money that's used by the time we get to town meeting. So I mentioned we'll have a couple of articles that supplement the current year's budget. We have some years where we may be using 300,000 or 400,000 of free cash to supplement the snow and ice budget, depending on what's happening. So the number you're seeing us use today could grow by the time we get to later in the budget process on free cash. But that in general, yes, there'll be some amount not allocated. Again, that begins what we have available for the next year. The same with the meal and hotel tax. There's a certain amount that will be in the account. We're using some of that for known capital projects. We want to make sure we have money available for future years because there'll be other capital projects. If we took all that funding, the free cash and the meals tax, and applied it all to this 1 year's budget, we create some serious structural problems for ourselves. So if we're approving school and municipal budgets that we're going to fund basically with plugged money, that's not there the next year. So if we put $1 million towards the 23 budget, we go into the next year, well, we don't have that money on hand. So we start out the 24 budget in the hole by that amount, meaning we're going to reduce our school municipal budgets by that amount. We don't want to do that. Or we're going to have a yo-yo effect. Well, maybe you lower taxes this year, by $1 million, but then next year you're going to have to increase them, the $1 million just to be even. If people say, I don't want to lay up any police or fire or teachers, and then grow from there. So we really try to use ongoing revenue for the ongoing budgets. We use these other amounts, the free cash and the meal and hotels, to do items that we don't have to then go and tax, to do the capital. But we're always able to pull back from those if needed. So if we had, which we had during the pandemic, if we have a decrease in that meals tax, we would have to maybe pull back from capital that we're using. The same with free cash. If we had something unusual going on, we had a disruption to that, we would have to pull back a little bit, but we wouldn't have to go in and disrupt our school and town operations.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for that. And I think I got the idea from somewhere in these two binders, and there's so many pages that I couldn't go back and find it exactly where it was, but that there was a tax burden reduction strategy that took free cash flow and applied that to the.
So that is a general strategy that's available by Department of Revenue. So I think we've put that out there where town meeting has to vote free cash, and they have to vote exactly what it's for. So you'll see the articles at town meeting will signify exactly what revenue we're using. So we have to use free cash. We have to say it's for this truck, it's for this building. Or you can say, we just want to lump it towards everything we're doing. So I think that's what you're referencing as we show that as a strategy. Again, that just gets into a little bit more of we're just plugging one year what we're spending. And really, if we don't want to tax at a certain level, we should really just not spend to that level. Versus kind of plugging in with one-time revenue, we just set up disruptions for future years.
Yeah, no, thank you. My last comment, and I don't want to take up any more airtime, is just like, I feel like free cash flow and the meal and hotel tax, though they're one time, they really are recurring because I think they occur every year. I think your point is that like, if you have COVID and meals and hotels go down, that revenue goes down and it becomes lumpy year over year.
Yes.
But I feel like we can probably rely on a certain amount of that coming back in those two buckets every year. So the idea was not to take every dime out of that pot and put it towards the budget, but can we take $300,000 or $500,000, which we could sort of all but guarantee in subsequent years.
That's in a sense, you're exactly right with that, and that's really the sense what we're doing with the capital, is that we're pulling out each year an amount that we know is pretty steady and saying we're going to apply that, and that's how we're going to pay for capital. So we're not paying for the capital out of the tax base, but that's in a sense what we're doing is like, that's our steady amount that we're going to use each year and give ourselves room if there's disruption above that. And a lot of communities, some of you have been on for a number of years, saw in COVID, they ran into trouble because they're putting their meal and hotel tax revenue towards their operating budget, towards their school municipal budget. And there were stories in the paper about towns not being able to support their teaching staff. And that's the last thing you want to have in a budget.
Thank you, Pam.
If I can just jump in too, Alex, give you an example, like Brookline uses their meter money as part of their budget, for all the meters that they have in Brookline. Well, how busy were they during COVID? Right, exactly. So that's what we try to avoid, is that's we only spend it when we get it and not before. And that makes for a better sound policy, because then we know it can be done. And we're not counting on it in the future. And when it's there, it's like Christmas morning. Okay, we have some money now to spend.
Got it.
And also, just Alex, just to add on to that, during the economic downturn that many municipalities faced back in fiscal year, I think it was 10 and 11, many communities that were using how we're identifying one-time money for one-time costs, and they were putting that in their operating budget, had significant changes within their services. So this is a more stable, more sustainable approach. And as Pam said, if we do have a change as we did with COVID, it's capital we're pulling back versus direct services.
Makes sense. Thank you all.
Thank you all. This is why it's so valuable to have all of you here. Thank you. Chris Pareda, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Pam, as I understand it, this is the 5th year that we've appropriated $150,000 to the Westwood Housing Authority for maintenance. That means over 5 years, we've appropriated $750,000 to the authority for maintenance. I'm just curious as to how much of that money they've spent over the past 4 years.
Yeah, so that program was not kind of for ongoing maintenance. It was to take, because again, their original housing stock, the town's original affordable housing stock was really gifted buildings to the town that were in pretty poor shape, which is why they were able to kind of be purchased and gifted to the town. And so that money was to really go into each of those original properties, upgrade them, bathrooms, kitchen, bringing them up to speed, roofs, whatever. So at the start of that 5-year plan, the Housing Authority came to the town with an outline and what was necessary on each of those properties. We, at the time, had the Long Range Financial Planning Committee. Some of you may remember that. The Housing Authority came to that group, went through everything. It was basically like, we can't really continue to rent these houses out in the condition they're in. We need a town appropriation to help us do these major upgrades and enhancements. So they have done that each year. So they've used all the money. So they had a plan on what it was. They take that money each year, do 1 or 2 houses, bring them up to speed, and then move on to the next one. So they're able to do their own ongoing maintenance. This was kind of an initial input of funds to bring that house up to speed. And now the Housing Authority has a policy. They would not now accept a house as a gift in that condition without some additional funds being available for them to bring that up to speed. They've had a change since then.
If you think just about the house needing, general maintenance, that's fine. But if it needs a new roof, that's something that Waha is not going to have the money for.
It's not going to cost $150,000 though, Michael.
No, not for one house. You're correct, but they have a lot more than one house.
Okay, so they've spent everything that we've given them so far.
Correct.
Or pretty much
Yes.
everything we've given them so far.
Correct.
And I think you had Lou Rizzoli from the Housing Authority come into you last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know he'd be available again if you'd like that again, but.
Well, he couldn't answer that question last year. So
Oh, okay.
I will take it from you that this isn't just trying to accumulate money in order
No.
to purchase another property.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all. Peter, do you have a question that Pam has not answered in the past?
Yes, I do. If you're able to hear me. Yes, I noticed the additional contributions to the Aid to the Elderly and Disabled charity, which I think is a very good idea. However, it's in the past, this has supported perhaps 45 to 55 seniors, which is a very tiny fraction of the over 3,000 seniors in Westwood. Also, your comment in your chart that Westwood has adopted the most generous state options available is actually not correct. Westwood does not accept the most generous senior option permitted by the state, that of clause 41C.5, which is a proposal. It also does not accept the inflation adjustments allowed for widows in clauses 17E and F. And the clause 41A, senior tax deferral at 3% interest, is not the most generous version of that option either, as the state allows an interest rate of 0. So my concern there is the existing senior options benefit only a tiny fraction of the over 3,000 seniors in Westwood. Also, the additional funds for the elderly and handicapped charity, this is going, as I understand it, from 50,000 last year to a 1-year contribution of 300,000. I think that's a very good idea. It would be particularly helpful with a transition to implementing the proposed acceptance of the clause 41C.5 senior exemption.
Okay, Peter, thank you for that comment. We will have a lot of time to discuss the citizens petition. I don't know if it was a comment. I don't know if there's any if anyone would like to address the comment.
I would be happy to, since I am on that committee and have been since becoming a member of the select board. So I can tell you this, perhaps, Peter, you might check into the state statute. There's only 2 towns that have adopted it, and there's a reason for that, is it's so unpredictable that it makes budgeting a nightmare based on how it's done and the state calculation. And the governor has realized that, and that's why he has put forth to double the circuit breaker this year, realizing that the statute is not helping and it's too unpredictable for towns to accept. So this town decided to step up, and we have the COA and all of the staff there reach out to find out the individuals that need the help the most and reach out to them. And then we go back and we review all of the applications. We do it very detailed checking because, you know, some people have low cash flow, but lots of assets sitting in the bank. So we are able to go through it, check it carefully, have it, you know, look at whatever they supply us. It's all confidential and nothing is ever released. And then we take care of those that have asked for the help. There are those that are asked but don't qualify. And this year we've decided, okay, with the new school coming on, maybe we need to take a deeper look because there might be more that need more because of the increased taxes. But we do a tremendous job. We spend a lot of time. We meet 3 or 4 times a year. In addition to the COA, putting all of that calculations together, reaching out and spending a lot of time reaching out to the seniors of Westwood. So I think that Westwood is doing a top-notch job. In fact, other towns are jealous of the way that we've constructed it and come to us to ask what we're doing and how we're able to do it. And we did it on a home rule petition. We're one of the only towns in the entire state of Massachusetts that are giving direct aid back to the elderly. So I don't know where you come up with the statute, but perhaps you might check as to who's really adopted it and why no one else has. If it's such a good thing for the seniors, I'm pretty sure that more than 2 towns out of 351 would have adopted it.
All right, thank you, Chairman Walsh. Okay, so without any other questions on this part of the budget presentation, I'm gonna thank the 3 of you very, very much. Chairman Walsh and Chris Coleman and Pam Dukeman, thank you very much. And I think we're gonna move to other business. Is that correct, Jane? We're gonna move to new business now?
Yes.
Okie dokie.
Thank you all for your time. You're
Thank
always
you very much.
patient as we go through this. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so new business. So we do have a bunch to do here. So we are going to assign the warrant articles for write-ups. And I know you've all got this list. We do know, because we just heard from Chairman Walsh, that there may be others that come from the select board, but what I think here is a pretty good list. So we are going to make the assignments of articles. Then we're going to, I think this is the right order to do it, Jane, but you jump in and help me here. Then we're going to talk about our upcoming meetings, and we're going to thank the subcommittees, because boy, you guys are just really, Lauren, wow, man, you are really, flying here, and we so appreciate it. And I know the school subcommittee is as well. So we're going to visit that. But I think that's all the right order. Jane, do you agree with me?
No, I do. And I just want to note for the record that we did not have anybody in the queue, public or press, Diane.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that.
Diane,
George?
can I just make one brief comment here, especially maybe to help the new members as people think about signing up to write particular articles or do the write-ups and articles. In the past, we have set up a process that I think has worked fairly well. And after we go through our public hearings, after we listen to comments from fellow FinCom members and from the public, we go through a process of voting on each of the articles. And after that, we ask a member of the Finance and Warrant Commission to write that up. And as part of that process, we rely on that individual to reflect the discussion that's taken place at the FinCom. And I think that process has worked extremely well over the last many years that I've served on the FinCom. And the other thing we have to recognize, we have to comply with the open meeting law, which really limits our ability to have deliberations that are not in the form of a public hearing. So I think the process we've set up where an individual takes responsibility for writing up the article, but also responsibility for reflecting the discussion and debate that took place and reflect that in a write-up is a process that's worked extremely well. So I just wanted to share those observations, especially with the new members as we go through this process. And remember, our votes are in public, they are open, they are transparent. And also anybody at any point in time can go online and take a look at all of our discussions online. I think it's one of the most transparent processes that I've participated in. So I just wanted to share those observations as people get ready to sign up for their articles. And as I've done in years past, I will also be available to help anybody if they do need some assistance in doing their write-ups. Okay, just wanted to make those comments.
Thanks, George. Very much appreciated. So I think the first, so we're going to go through these. Does everybody have the list of articles, or would you like us, Jane, to put this on the screen? I like to see us all.
Yeah, I don't have the ability to do that right now.
Yeah, do people have it in front of them?
I would like to see the list on the screen.
You'd like to see the list on the screen. Okay, then I won't be able to see you all. So it's going to be hard to call on you. But Jane, would you put the list on the screen?
I can't because
you can't.
No, I can't.
Okay.
At this point. No.
Okay, well, I think this is going to be pretty easy. So budget articles 1 through 9, Jane tells me that she and I do. So that's really easy. We don't need a volunteer for budget articles 1 through 9. We already have that volunteer. Budget 10 is the OPEB liability. And I believe Chris, oh, love you. Thank you. Chris took it on. Then the next 3 are kind of related. So this is the increase to the aid to the elderly, the 2 citizens petitions, the property tax exemption for 2 citizens petitions. I think they're kind of related. And I was going to ask if Tom Kilgariff would be willing to take these on.
I was going to volunteer for those 3, Diane. How about that?
How about that, Tom Kilgariff? Okay, so now we turn the page. All right. So the next one.
If I might make an observation, of course, I'm perhaps the most knowledgeable person about this stuff, and I would like to be involved. I would certainly like to see whatever is written up before it gets going to press. But
thank you for that comment. So now
can I ask a question for the chairman?
Yeah.
If this, wouldn't it be a conflict of interest if a member of the FinCom is proposing an article for him or she then to write up the article? I kind of think that's a conflict of interest. And in this case, while Peter is most knowledgeable about it, wouldn't it make sense for a member of the FinCom, and I would defer to Jane or Diane or George Hertz to tell me or to clarify, but shouldn't they recuse themselves from a vote or abstain from a vote if they're the ones sponsoring the article?
So this issue has been raised with the sponsor of the article by the town moderator. And it is an issue between the sponsor and the town moderator.
Sorry.
Certainly, the individual who sponsors the article would not write up the article, and we just heard his comment about that. So, Tom, I really appreciate your taking this on.
I didn't. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would like to answer the question on recusal. This issue was raised actually with the State Ethics Commission, and the answer is no, I do not need to recuse.
Well, unfortunately, we haven't seen that, but Peter, we appreciate that that's your representation. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe clarify one thing based upon the comments I made. I think Tom is totally capable of doing the write-up on these 3 articles. And as we said, okay, that one person will take responsibility for writing up the article. He will reflect the discussions that take place. And the only person who can edit that write-up is the chair. That's the way we operate, and that's the way this needs to be done.
Thank you, George. Okay, let's go on. So now we're on the select board articles. There's the street acceptance article of Porter Street. I honestly, Jane, you might be able to help us with this. What do we think this article is going to take in terms of a write-up? Is this going to be pretty simple?
Yes, it is. It's very standard. I can supply it's a great article for maybe a new member to write, because I can supply some very good examples when we've done, street acceptance in the past. And so it would be a nice article. I think Mike Gay is giving a thumbs up on that.
Mike Gay, you're there. Thank you.
I want the next easy one.
All right, Christina, you got it. Okay. So
I want good streets on Porter as I cut through there every day.
Good. So Chris, I was going to ask you if you take the Opeb Baker House, because I do think it is somehow, why did I think that? I thought that it was somehow
related to.
Well, it is related to one of the planning board articles.
Planning board
But
article.
I would ask one of my subcommittee
Yeah.
members to take it on.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm wrong. I was not going to ask you that, and I apologize because that's wrong. Okay.
I'm
So,
happy to take that one.
Who's that?
Caitlin.
Caitlin.
Caitlin. Thank you, Caitlin.
Yep.
Caitlin, and can you take planning board article 3 that's related to it as well? Those things
Yes.
go hand in hand. Great, thank you.
Thank you. I knew it was related to something and I was going to ask, so thank you for that. Then we have the acquisition of real property. That might be Christina's easy one. What do you think, Jane?
Well,
No.
no, I'm not saying, I think that would be with select
The
board
Opeb.
article 2. Those are 2 related.
Yeah.
So I think whoever takes 3, it would probably make sense to take 4. And I don't, certainly I think Christina would be more than able to do that. But there are 2 articles there, so.
Well, do I have a volunteer for those 2 articles?
I'll take it.
Bruce, thank you.
You'll take 3 and 4, Bruce, for me?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, so now we're down to the planning board, and so I'm assuming that planning board members are going to volunteer for these. You may have already discussed them. There's the first one, which is probably the most complicated of them all.
Yeah, I'll do that one, Diane.
Thank you, Chris.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
also do the other one on the solar too.
Are you sure you want to take both of those on?
Sure. Because I'll have help from my erstwhile subcommittee on the first one, so that I can do the second one easily.
All right, Chris, very generous of you. Then we have the non-conforming uses and structures. Who on the planning board would like to take that? That's Christina. There
I
we
was gonna say,
go.
Christina, that's a good one to start with, yes.
Great.
That one we can give you examples of too.
Okay, and that's planning board item 4?
Yes.
Yep, planning board 4.
Perfect.
Okay. And then we have 2 more planning boards, the zoning map of Providence Highway and the housekeeping. And again, these I think are pretty straightforward. Who on the planning board would like to volunteer here?
I'll take another one of those. Happy to take either 5 or 6.
Is that Caitlin that I'm
Both.
hearing? Caitlin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Caitlin, the planning board, Article 6, the housekeeping, it's very standard. I could supply you with lots of examples.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, do we have anyone who didn't volunteer for something here?
George,
George, you guys on the school committee, you are really straight. I think that's you and Al. Who's on the school committee with you? Mike.
Myself, Bill, and Michael Gay.
Yeah, you guys are really
Yeah,
on
thanks.
straight with your work on the school committee, so you're going to be excused. So thank you. So I think we're good. I think we've got it all. Jane will send out the list.
I will. And these are.
Jane, I wasn't sure, Jane, we did a 3-page write-up already of the preliminary comments for the education budget. I'm not sure, Bill's shaking his head, so I may have missed something.
Yeah, he's going to regroup with you guys tomorrow, and we'll get that to the Emily and her team probably by Friday.
I don't want anybody to think we're being slack, and we did do a 3-page write-up already of it with about 55 different bullets.
Yes, you are on the case. Bill has got it under control too.
And is Renee joining us? Is that official?
I just saw a thumbs up.
Awesome.
Okay.
The draft is in full effect.
Okay.
I will
So-
add him all those emails.
So I do want to thank Lauren for you guys are just like all over this. I've seen that you've assigned the various budgets to your committee. I see that you've got meetings going on already. So you guys are all over it. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. And also, so new members know this list, the numbering will change, the order could change, but for our purposes right now, we'll keep it like this until at least our second public hearing.
Okay. So let's look at the meetings coming up, and then we can talk about the deadlines for the write-ups. Does that make sense, Jane?
Yes, that's great. I've got that.
Okay. So we had meetings on March 1st, on March 15th, on March 29th.
Yes.
So we have 3 meetings. So the first one on March 1st is our first public hearing.
Correct.
So Jane, tell us what we're going to cover in that first public meeting, if you would.
The first public hearing, we will hear again from our petition articles. That'll be generally for the first public hearing, it is any petition articles that we have. We ask the petitioner to focus on new information. If they have that, the select board will give us their articles, everything except for the financial articles that Pam does on the last day, the 29th at our final public hearing. And then the planning board will also be back to us on March 1st with all of their the work that they have done on the articles up until that day. So those are sort of their big nights. We'll hear the petition articles, we'll hear from the planning board, and we'll hear the select board articles. We may also hear if any new articles are those miscellaneous that we have, those placeholders, if anything develops there that Mike Walsh had talked about, if there's anything new, we'd have that first so that we have plenty of opportunity to hear more about those in detail. So that's March 1st.
So Jane sent in the cover email a question about whether or not we are willing to extend that meeting. I feel like that might end up being a long meeting. And so I was wondering if you all agree with that and think we might start earlier rather than start at 6 o'clock, if it is all possible to start at 5 or 5:30.
What date?
It depends upon whether it's going to be by virtual or if at that time we have to be in person.
So it's March 1st, Tuesday, March 1st. And Jim, you have your hand up. Did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, my concern would be the public's ability to participate.
Good point.
Are they going to be having dinner, school functions, getting home from work?
Mhm. That's a good point. Other comments, thoughts?
And I can't personally make it any earlier. I'll be traveling, so.
Okay.
Not that that should dictate the group meeting time, but
5 o'clock is kind of early for me to.
personally.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. So, you know, what'd you say? I'm sorry.
I said I can make 5:30. 5 o'clock is early for me as well.
I could do 5:30 too. 5 o'clock, yeah, no way I couldn't, but 5:30 I could possibly swing.
So could people do 5:30 if we're on Zoom?
Yeah.
Yes.
Jim, does that help to ameliorate your concern about the public, or do you still think that's too early?
Yeah, I know my schedule. I don't know the general public schedule. I know we've gone from 7 o'clock meetings. Now we're pushing 5:30. I'm just putting it out there. I don't know.
I just want to let people know it's going to be a long night, is my guess. If we start at 6, It's 9:30 now, and this was not going to be a long meeting.
And
I
this was
think
only
we're-
half the meeting. I mean, I think you might be
Yeah.
pushing 2 nights anyway.
we might be pushing 2 nights, or we're certainly going to be here until 11. So I just want to put that out there.
Well,
I
5
can try
to
to-
11 makes, without stopping, makes for a long
night.
Sounds like 2 nights might be a better choice.
What do people think?
But you can't have a 5-hour meeting. Some people don't sleep 5 hours in a night. I mean,
I know.
I think
I know.
5 hours.
I know we used to. Jane, didn't we before what's her name became chair and was so good about timekeeping? Didn't these meetings used to go way into the night?
They did. And also, I think, we already have heard, the petition articles were quite extensive the first time we did them. So, we got a lot of that. I don't know if Peter will have a lot more new information. And then several of the select board articles, I mean, there aren't that many of them, are pretty straightforward. And you've also heard something from the planning board. So
Yeah, but I really think that planning board article on the zoning is going to be a long discussion. That's my guess, if I were to guess it. I think the public's going to have thoughts about that. I just think it's going to be a long discussion. I could be wrong. I mean, people may not have a lot of comments. I don't know.
And always traditionally, this budget meeting is a long meeting. So I was actually thinking that we got through it quite, in good time, because this is usually one of our longer meetings because there's so much to cover and there's usually a lot of questions. So I think we're kind of in good shape. Generally, what we do is we get to the first public hearing, we see how we're doing. I always have the second night reserved and posted, and people can make a decision, when they're in it, to decide if they want to continue on or they want to move it to the next night. I think the Zoom helps us. Public can kind of log in and out. And I think we should plan on Zoom, given the fact that the town is going to keep the COVID structure in place until the last day of February. So I don't think we have time to make a decision to go, hybrid at that point. So.
Diane, I agree with Jim. I think 6 o'clock is to keep it consistent. And also, if we're looking at if it's going to be a long meeting, goes from 6 to 11, and then we need to spill into a second night, then, so be it. Because after about 5 hours, I think that, we'll be zombies. And I would be. And like Jim said, we used to start these at 7. So 6 to 11, is a good chunk of time. And who knows, we may get into it. I think that in the past, if we were close to the finish line at around 11 and it spilled to like 11:15 or whatever, but it avoided a second night, we've done that a couple times too.
Yeah.
So you sort of kind of play it by ear.
Okay, well, let's do that. Let's plan to start at 6. Plan for a long night. I think it will be. And plan for a potential second night if it's needed. Okay, I try to be pretty good about moving folks along, but I also try to be sure everybody has a chance to talk. So it's a tough balance.
We also know going in, the planning board will give us an idea of how long they're going to take. Peter gave us an idea of how long he needed last time, and the select board will do the same. So we will have, they'll tell us we'd like 45 minutes or we'd like whatever. So we'll know that going in.
Okay, good.
I don't
All right, thank you then.
I don't think
Okay.
it's gonna be as long as you think it is. So
Okay.
I'll say that in a positive note.
Okay, so the subcommittee reports are going to be on Tuesday, March 15th. And there's a snow day for that of Wednesday, March 16th. If we're hybrid, we're not going to need that snow day. And so that is for the subcommittees that we have to make their reports. If you are new and you didn't see the reports last year and how they're given, usually the committee, gives a slideshow and talks. It's often divided up among committee members. It's not really long. It's concise and clear, and it's the job of the subcommittee to tell the rest of us everything they think we need to know, right? And you will have heard from everybody already, so you have that as all background. So if you have questions about subcommittee reports, please, George Hertz is available, I am, or any of the more senior members. So that's the 15th. And then I don't think the 29th is going to go that long. That's the financial. I just think that we'll be able to get through that part of the public hearing without torture. Jane, do you agree with me?
Usually the financial takes some time because that's, we will go over each article. And then how we position it is, because it's our final public hearing, anybody else who is a warrant article sponsor who has anything new to share will also have the opportunity to, reloop into, if they have any updates for us. So we'll hear from Pam first. Then if we'll know going in, if anybody, the planning board or select board articles or the petition articles, if we have any new information that needs to be shared, they'll have a short opportunity to give an update. And it's only for new information. And then the most important thing is then we would start, we close the public hearing and we would start the voting.
That's what takes time at that one.
Yes.
Yes. So we close the public hearing and we move to voting, and that takes time because it's our opportunity for everybody to express their opinion, so it's clear about how you feel, it's clear about any concerns and questions you have at the end, so that does take time. We're a big committee, and so that takes some time.
And think about it, there's 10 miscellaneous articles on here.
Yeah.
So really we only have 22 articles that we're talking about right now, and several of them are standard articles. So I think, as always, there'll be a few that are, more discussion will be, but this is a manageable warrant. Usually we have 30, something active articles, and we don't this year right now. Not that it couldn't change, but it's actually,
But Jane, even with 22 articles, if each one of them takes 5 minutes to discuss and vote, that's 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it's important. It's important time. So, and again, you can do this, you can plan beforehand that you want to break it into 2 nights, or you can do the, check the pulse of everybody after they're done and the discussions are done and everybody's questions are answered. You can always make the decision to come back the next night and do the voting. So, we've done it both ways. So it's really at the chair's discretion, and I'm sure Diane's going to look to you all to find out what your comfort level is.
Yeah, let me know. We will be talking about it. But so our first one is on, let me look at these dates again. I always get confused, March 1st. So we have several weeks before that March 1st meeting. We have a lot of work to do in the meantime. And so thank you all for all of that amazing work that you do. Thank you. Okay. Is there anything else about the warrant articles, the assignments, the meetings, anything coming up before us that we feel like we should talk about as a group tonight?
Diane, I think we've touched on it, but I just wanted to review for some of the newer folks. So that March 1st and possibly March 2nd meeting will be to reintroduce the warrant articles in discussion, and then for all those that have a write-up on an article, take good notes that night, especially when your article is being discussed. And then your write-up is for the book for town meeting.
Yes.
Which is in May, but the write-up is due, probably in April, or, Jane will tell us, but.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of our warrant articles that don't have a unanimous vote of the commission. In my experience, that was my 3rd or 4th year here. There aren't a lot, but the ones where there are, that's where you really have to pay close attention if you're writing those summaries for the warrant book, because you really got to capture both sides. So, if it's unanimous, then you kind of get all the information you need way ahead of time. But then once we start discussing, you pick up the minority opinions, majority opinions, whatever they are.
Right, but you don't know the vote until we take it, so take
That's
good
right.
notes.
Yeah,
know.
it's the discussion just prior to the vote that's most important to reflect accurately in the book.
Yes.
And certainly pay
Can I
attention.
just-
Tom's point is a very valid one. You can certainly pay extra attention to get the background on the article when they're presenting them. But it is your mission when you do the write-up is to reflect what the commission is voting on. So that can't be done until we do the vote.
Now, who does the reintroduction of the warrant articles? Is that going to be like, so I'm on the planning? So is someone from planning going to come in and do that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Everybody,
Yes.
all the warrant article sponsors will come to us on March 1st, other than Pam and the financial articles. Those are on the 29th. So she did the budget for us tonight. Then March 1st is the big night is for planning board, select board articles other than the financial articles. And then we'll get the petition articles on that night too. That's the three big chunks, that first public hearing.
Okay, let's move on to approving last month's minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second,
Do I have any comments on the minutes?
Yes, I have comments on the minutes. If I may proceed first, I'm pleased that the documents on the senior exemptions are posted on the commission's website, but they're included in the minutes for the wrong meeting. They should be included with the minutes that we are reviewing tonight for the meeting of January 18th, where this was discussed. Rather, they're attached to the minutes of the prior meeting in December where this topic was not discussed. And I suggest fixing this. Also, there are web links in those minutes that allow people to call up those documents, but the web links are not clickable, so they're essentially useless. And I suggest fixing that as well. I have one other comment about the minutes. I objected to an objectionable paragraph in the minutes of the last meeting. And I noticed that the new minutes include every word of that objectionable paragraph again, this time in italics. And again, it does not report my reply. This was not quoted at the previous meeting and is superfluous and annoying. So I would like to move that to delete the section in italics in the minutes after the first sentence, beginning the chair then asked for a motion to approve the December minutes. Is there a second?
Do we have a second on that motion to amend the minutes? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Can we then move, any other comments on the minutes? Can we then move to a vote on the minutes? Jane, would you do so, please?
Certainly. Could I just have the who did the motion and the second originally for them? So it was Chris made the motion, and was it Mike Gay who seconded it?
no, George Leham made the motion, I seconded.
Thank you. Just for the record, George. Okay, Bill,
Yes.
Jim Ferraro,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Angela,
Yes.
Peter,
No.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
George, Leham,
Yes.
Diane,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes,
Alex.
Yes.
All right, can we have a motion to adjourn?
Second. Motion to
I so
adjourn.
moved to adjourn.
All right, we have a second.
Second.
Jane, do you want to do the roll call?
Yes. Chris and Angela. Bill,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
George Hertz, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Angela,
Yes.
Peter,
Thankfully, yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
George, Laham.
Yes.
Diane,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
and Alex.
Yes.
We are adjourned at 9:39.
Thank you guys
See you guys.
so
Good night,
much.
everyone.
Good night,
Great job.
everyone. Thank you.